Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy Fanfics, back with Amazing Fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Luffy Was Unaware of His Mother's Existence. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Big Mom was enjoying her snack and waiting on the report she had ordered of Monkey D. Luffy's family. That ballsy brat had claimed to have eaten all of her candy from Fishman Island and then said he would defeat her. Now despite what most of the world thought, including some of her own subjects she knew, Big Mom was not easy to anger most of the time. A child like Luffy boasting big, she was used to hearing it. Honestly, he wouldn't be the first to try and fight her, and he won't be the last, she was certain. Besides, she has 85 children that she raised from birth until now. She was more than used to hearing them boast that they were going to be stronger than her back when they were younger, especially her boys. She never really took offense to someone claiming that they were going to kick her ass. Honestly, she has heard it hundreds of times before, so why would she? What pissed her off the most about the brat was the obvious lie to her about how he had eaten all of her Fishman candy and that he had the missing member of the Vinsmokes that she was going to arrange for her beloved Pudding to marry on his crew. While she never truly favored one child over the other, although she found it impossible to look at and interact with her daughter Chiffin without flying into a rage thanks to her twin sister Lola's desertion, she did admit that she spoiled Pudding more than the others and gave her more attention, thanks to her third eye giving her the ability to read poneglyphs. The very few who somehow found out about this ability and knew about the red poneglyph in her possession often tried to kidnap or kill Pudding, especially back when she had been a baby. Dolce, Draghi, what have I told you about pulling Inanna's hair? The voice of one of her elder children, Bruy, her beautiful broken inside eighth daughter, demanded, snapping Big Mom out of her thoughts and drawing her gaze from the small by comparison pastry in her hand to some of her younger children. Bruy, the proud but scarred mirror user, was holding little Inanna, her 37th daughter and a true little terror in the making, on one rather bony hip and was reprimanding the twins who were holding the remains from their balloons now and looking a bit miserable. Judging by the mirror shards, it was obvious that Bruy had popped the boys' balloons this time instead of Inanna herself, probably for pulling their sister's hair. But Bruy, she's a psychopath. The twins protested in unison, like they so often did, and making Inanna look upset with tears in her eyes. What have I said about calling her that? Bruy demanded, looking furious and disappointed with the two boys, and Big Mom as well as some of the older children knew why. Bruy had been interested in a rather good-looking and wealthy son of a noble back when she had been 16, but the boy had turned out to be a true sociopath and psychopath and kept it hidden for a few years. The day before the two of them were to be married on Bruy's 21st birthday, the boy had snapped and tried to kill his fiancée. He had cut off most of Bruy's nose and gave her a horrible scar that went diagonally across her face, just barely avoiding her left eye. It had only been thanks to luck and her siblings wanting to see their sister one last time before she was married that they had been able to get to her before she bled out, and managed to reattach her nose despite the fact that it was discolored now. He had mutilated one of her babies and nearly killed her the day before she married him. It was supposed to have been the happiest day of her daughter's life, and yet it ended up being one of the darkest. Prospero had been the one to get there first and had surprised most of them when his calm if not slightly unhinged personality went full on protective fiery rage on the one who had dared to harm one of his baby sisters. It had taken Big Mom, several dozen chess peacekeepers, Compote, and the triplets to keep the eldest child from outright killing his sister's attacker. He had been very pissed when he had been stopped and had stayed that way for over an hour. Right up until Big Mom told him that she was sure all of Bruy's siblings wanted to show their disappointment in his actions to the man himself. Once the siblings were done, but left the scumbag alive on their mother's orders, Big Mom drained his soul slowly over the course of weeks to months until Bruy was finally recovered enough physically, emotionally, and mentally to see the man again. She had been jittery, nervous, even outright scared but she had done it with her two favorite big brothers standing beside her for support. Big Mom had left just enough of the man's soul in his body for him to be alive, and knowing full well who had finally ended his misery and killed him. Bruy had even been gracious, or cruel as some would say, enough to have used the very same knife her former fiancé had used to slash her face open and nearly blind her in one eye. Sorry, Bruy, the twins said, looking shamefaced and upset once Bruy finally was done reaming them both a new one for what they had called their younger sister and how they had been treating her. Am I a psychopath? Inanna asked quietly, looking up at her favorite big sister scared and tearfully. Bruy immediately began bouncing the little girl and rocking on her feet slightly as everyone watched. Not that the eighth daughter cared in the least. No, sweetheart, you're nowhere near being a psychopath. You're just a little bit sadistic or perhaps a little more twisted in the mind than some of the rest of us, but that's okay. We're all twisted in our own ways and some more than others. So what, you like to cut things or pop their balloons? Maybe that means you'll take an interest in swordsmanship or at least knife wielding as your fighting style. Or maybe you'll be more interested in being in the medical field like a surgeon. Bruy quickly began to softly soothe her little sister, well, one of the littlest ones, that is. Despite being vain and arrogant around outsiders, seeming as if she only wanted to carve up every pretty face she met, she was actually very gentle and understanding with her siblings. All of the Charlotte siblings from 9th to 85th looked up to and had a bit of a soft spot for the 8th daughter. Katakuri may be the favorite big brother, and Compote may be the eldest sister ... but Bruy was the favorite big sister. Oftentimes she had used her mirror powers to check on and keep an eye on her siblings, who all had small mirrors in their possession at all times. And all of her siblings, and even her mother, knew that if they needed her to be there and simply said her name into a mirror ... then she'd hear them and be there in less than a minute. Surgeons have to cut people up to fix them. Maybe that's what you'd be into when you're older. But for now it's too early to tell, and that's fine. You like cutting things, then you keep cutting things, but don't kill anyone or anything living until you're at least 13, all right? Bruy asked, bouncing her sister a bit more and earning a small smile and a nod from one of the youngest 3 girls in the family. MK, Inanna said, cuddling close to her favorite big sister, making Bruy smile warmly at Inanna while Big Mom smiled fondly at her daughters. You'll make a very good mother one day, Bruy, Big Mom said, not for the first time, making Bruy's eyes widen, and she blushed brightly as she looked away from everyone ... but they all saw the small smile on her face, even as her reaction caused them all to laugh a bit. She was so easily flustered by compliments. Even back before she had been scarred, she had been easy to fluster. Sometimes her siblings would say different things or compliments just to watch their clumsy, ticklish, broken sister blush bright red and flounder about a bit. It was one of the less damaging but still a bit sadistic things the siblings like to do. Sadistic towards their targeted sister, of course. Bruy has cursed her siblings out more than once when the younger ones couldn't hear for it while stumbling over her feet in embarrassment. Mama, Tamego came rushing into the room as fast as he could, only ending up crashing into Bruy. The two of them went down in a swirl of growls, yelps, and curses while the rest of the Charlotte siblings in attendance either busted out laughing ... or tried to hide the fact that they were laughing. Leave it to their clumsy, accident-prone sister to have that happen to her. Although it seemed her observation haki was getting a bit stronger. Not many of her siblings had noticed it, but Big Mom had. Just before Tamego had entered the room, Bruy stopped blushing as she looked at the door and quickly but carefully tossed Inanna to the closest sibling who would catch her. In this case it was Amand, the third-born daughter, who had reacted in a surprisingly fast pace and caught the tossed girl in her arms. Tamego, you have 5 seconds to separate yourself from Bruy ... and 3 to tell me why you were in such a hurry that you disturbed my time with my children, Big Mom said, glaring at Tamego, who hastily scrambled off of Bruy and away from the tall woman. Big Mom didn't often spend a lot of time with her family altogether unless it was a tea party ... and even then most of the time a few of her children couldn't make it due to attacking pirates and other such things. When she did spend time with all of her children, even though Katakuri was away at the moment retrieving a present for Cinnamon's birthday next week, she guarded it fiercely and jealously. Tamego had been in service to the Charlotte family for a long time, since a year or so before Bruy's ex-fiancé tried to kill her. In fact, he knew that although they didn't often show it openly, especially around others, most of the Charlotte siblings numbers 16 and up were very protective of the 8th sister. The younger siblings were a bit protective too, but they were that protective over all of their loyal siblings ... The older ones were more protective of their broken sister than they were their other sibling. The information you asked for, on Straw Hat Luffy's family, Tamego panted out, making everyone pause for a moment and look at him while Big Mom's eyes narrowed and Smoothie helped her sister up. Hurry up and spit it out, Big Mom said, even as she had picked up her youngest daughter to sit on her lap when the little blonde girl held her arms up towards her mother. Big Mom smiled softly down at her youngest as she handed the girl a small tea cake that was about the same size as the child's head. But the little girl had her mother's appetite as she devoured it in less than a minute. His father, like they said at the War of Best, it wasn't a lie to aim the Marines at him. Tamego hurried to rush out while Big Mom looked at him annoyed a bit. Why should she care about the damn war? All she cared about was the fact that Whitebeard had died during it, which had left Fishman Island ripe for the taking. And took it she had. They had delivered the sweets on time ever since she claimed the island, right up until that damn Straw Hat had the gall to claim he had. His father is Monkey D. Dragon, the leader of the revolutionaries, Tamego said, causing most of the elder children to jerk slightly as they stared in shock. Damn Straw Hat. Straw Hat. Dragon. Everyone could tell when the information processed in Big Mom's mind as her eyes slowly widened, her mouth dropped open a little bit. Dragon ... but wasn't that? Smoothie trailed off, staring wide-eyed at her siblings that had been old enough to remember when the man had visited their home. The one who stole one of our brothers, Oven said, his face set into a scowl as the floor heated up slightly underneath his feet at the reminder. That was one of his only and worst failures, being unable to protect his newborn brother. Stole our brother, Anglias, the youngest son, asked confused as he looked at his elder sibling. As far as they knew, there weren't any more brothers than the ones they had grown up knowing. Have you never wondered why we sometimes said that Ewan was supposed to be one of two? Bruy asked, looking at her younger siblings, who exchanged looks. Yeah, they had wondered about that before, especially Ewan, but after seeing how angry and sad the question made Mama when they had asked once, they never brought it up again. Monkey D. Dragon. 19 years ago he gave me a child. I hadn't known it at the time, but I had already been pregnant with Ewan before Dragon gave me a child. They were born 3 months apart, with Ewan being the elder of the two. Big Mom said, her fist shaking as she gripped her arm rests hard enough that they began to crack. Compote quickly rushed over and grabbed her youngest sister from Big Mom's lap. Big Mom tried not to lash out at her kids, even if sometimes she couldn't help it with Chiffin looking so much like the traitorous Lola. But when she got in a rage, she was blinded to who was who. She had informed all of her children to never try and stand in her way when she was in a rage, or else she might accidentally treat them like an enemy. However, the night the younger one was born, Dragon surprised us all by breaking the window to the nursery and stealing the newborn baby boy away right from his cradle. No matter how we looked, and no matter where we looked, Big Mom trailed off while the elder siblings, who had been old enough to help look at the time, looked down at the ground. They had been unable to find and retrieve their baby brother. The guilt of it had weighed heavily on all of them, even as most tried to pretend it had never happened. After years of searching, many thought their brother was dead. Tamego, get all information we can on Luffy and then get Katakuri here. We're bringing the missing son home, Big Mom ordered, making the man quickly rush from the room. Looks like he takes a good bit after me, Big Mom said, chuckling after a few seconds, earning looks of confusion from her kids. How so, Mama? Deifuku asked, looking at his mother, who smirked a bit. 19 years old and already with a bounty of 300 million berry, all of his own doing. Not to mention it explains what he said over the snail, Big Mom said, chuckling a little more and making the ones who hadn't been there for the call look confused. Big Mom raised an eyebrow at her kids and then grinned wider, making a few snicker or giggle in agreement with their mother. You know any other family where just one person can eat 10 tons of sweets, presumably all in one go? Katakuri was away now, tracking down his younger brother's ship and crew, while Tamego seemed nervous as was he stared down by the other 84 Charlotte siblings and Big Mom herself. I put some pressure on our usual contacts and have some startling information on Monkey D. Luffy, Tamego said, sweating slightly as Big Mom finished her brownie and stared at him. Well, Big Mom asked, looking at him as if daring it to be bad news. It seems that he was raised in East Blue on an island called Fuchsia. Shall I send some of our spies there to gather more information? Tamego asked, making Bruy stand up from her seat at the table. With your permission, Mama, I'd be able to get there and back faster than any of our spies, Bruy said, looking at her mother, who thought about it for a moment. East Blue is the weakest sea, and with her powers, as long as there weren't any mirrors coated in sea stone or in the water, then Bruy would be able to get there and back in no time. Very well, go ahead. We shall tell you what Tamego has discovered when you return, but I want you to check in every 3 days if it takes that long. If you miss one check-in, I'm sending Oven and Deifuku to check on you, Big Mom said, making Bruy smile up at her brightly, which took at least 10 years off of her appearance. Don't worry so much, Mama. I'm a grown woman, and besides, East Blue is considered the weakest of them all, Bruy said, summoning a mirror to sink into and quickly vanishing into the mirror world, tripping over her own feet as she did so. She may be one of the eldest siblings, but she's also the clumsiest, Cinnamon said, sweat dropping a bit and earning nods of agreement from the others. Continue with your report, Tamego, Big Mom ordered, making the man jump a bit and nod as he looked at the papers in his hands. His first mate is pirate hunter Rorona Zoro, who is rumored to have faced Mihawk back in East Blue and somehow survive a slash from his black blade, Tamego said, earning an impressed hum from Big Mom, while the swordsmen and women in the family looked impressed as well. To survive a slash from that sword is impressive, Amon acknowledged as she had a hilt on her own sword. I'd expect no less from the first mate of one of my children. Continue, Big Mom said, picking up a slice of cake from off the table. It seems that he has taken on every pirate with a bounty that is considered large for East Blue and emerged the victor with very little, if any, injury, Tamego said, earning a snort from several siblings. Of course he did. He's a Charlotte and New World born. East Blue is a bunch of guppies by comparison, Opera said, calmly, earning nods from the others. The list includes Iron Mace Alvida, a Marine captain named Axe Hand Morgan, Fleet Admiral Don Creed, Buggy the Clown, who is now a warlord with Alvida as a part of his crew, and a fishman known as Arlong, along with all of the above pirates mentioned crew, Tamego said, making silence ring out at the end. Even in the East Blue, fishmen are 10 times stronger than normal people. Taking out a crew of fishmen is impressive, especially outside of the Grand Line where they are few and far between, Citron said after a moment, earning nods while most of the younger kids had stars in their eyes. Their big brother was so strong. From there they went through Logtown to the reverse mountain, but here Tamago hesitated a bit, looking nervous. But what? Big Mom asked even as she reached for a glass of tea. It seems that Iron Mace and Buggy the Clown had launched a joint operation in Logtown and captured Straw Hat for a small amount of time. They were planning on executing him where Gold Roger was executed. Tamago flinched when the cup in Big Mom's grip was reduced to dust in an instant. One of our spies in Logtown was in the square when it happened. They had managed to catch Straw Hat unaware from behind using an acrobat and had cuffed him with sea stone. Pirate Hunter and the missing Vinsmoke, Sanji, had stormed the plaza attempting to stop the execution, but they weren't going to make it apparently. Tamago hurried to continue before there was a loud yelp and a bunch of muffled swears when Bruy appeared out of one of the mirrors on the wall by her mother. Unfortunately, it seemed she had chosen to fall out of one of the mirrors hanging up several yards up the wall. Back so soon, Bruy? Big Mom asked, catching her daughter in one hand, amused at how she had came out of the wrong mirror. It was just like when she had first eaten her devil fruit all over again. I popped out of a mirror in a bar, and it seems the bar owner looked after Luffy a lot when he was a child. I got most all of the information I was looking for as soon as I told her we believed that Luffy might be my missing little brother, Bruy said, looking completely at ease in her mother's hand as she was lowered to the floor. What did you learn, Bruy? Smoothie asked her big sister, who jumped out of her mother's hand first. He was dropped off on Dawn Island when he was barely 4 months old by his grandfather, Monkey D. Garp. He was left there in the care of the other villagers. Garp only stopped by once every year or so to train Luffy, Bruy said, clenching her fists tightly at that and making everyone look at her. Sis? Colette asked, looking at Bruy. According to what I heard, Luffy was dropped into a bottomless ravine, thrown into a forest full of dangerous animals, tied to several balloons and sent into the sky, and that's just the start of Garp training him to become a marine. Bruy hisses, darkly looking furious at what she had heard. That was before he was even 7. Before he had eaten a devil fruit. After that they said that his training only got worse. Bruy began to tremble in rage. Ever since her ex-fiancé's death and her scarring, Bruy never truly got angry. Did she get annoyed? Yes, plenty of times. Did she sometimes fly into a rage like their mothers? Yes, but not very often, and usually after someone had insulted her because of her scar or attacked one of her siblings. Did she ever get furious without it being part of what some dubbed the family insanity? No, but right now she was downright furious, and none of them could blame her, but they were about to be treated to a very rare and dangerous sight. Bruy about to go completely apeshit, and they were sitting at fucking ground zero. Bruy was about to start on a rather loud and long rant when she suddenly crashed to the floor. Nissan. Colette was out of her chair and literally hopping over the table in record time as she slid down to check on Bruy. Oi sis, what's wrong? Oven, go get a doctor. Prospero knelt by Bruy's side as well, yelling at the fourth son, who dashed off and melted his way through several walls. Did those people from East Blue do something to her? Ammon asked as Prospero and Colette checked on their sister using their limited medical knowledge. If the doctor confirms it ... then prepare for a hostile takeover. Big Mom ordered her children, who all nodded slightly. How dare some weaklings from East Blue hurt their sister? Let me see the patient, the head doctor said as Oven finished dragging him into the room and shoving him in Bruy's direction. The others cleared a path for him, but Colette and Prospero stayed right where they were as Colette checked her sister's pulse and Prospero had Bruy's head in his lap. She's alive, but her pulse is unusually slow, Colette said, glancing up at the doctor, who began examining the mirror woman using his heal fruit. Did she use her devil fruit recently, and if so, then to where? The doctor asked, glancing up at the siblings. She went to get information from East Blue, a Fuchsia village, I believe, Prospero said, making the doctor look up at them wide-eyed. She's never been to East Blue, has she? Nor does she have any mirrors that she's familiar with there, does she? The doctor asked as his hands began to glow green while he held them over Bruy's chest. No, she said she used a mirror in a bar inside of the village, however, Colette informed him, watching him attentively as he focused his attention and powers upon Bruy's chest area. That explains the readings I'm getting. She overused her fruit and put a great deal of strain on her body doing so, the doctor said, even though he didn't look away from his patient. Lady Bruy is used to using the mirrors on the islands and in the castle. By not only going an incredible distance like she had, but also using an unknown and untested mirror, she placed heavy strain on her body. Lord Oven, you're able to heat things up without burning through them, right? The doctor asked, glancing up at the orange-haired fourth son, who blinked but nodded. Good. Lady Bruy's core temperature is dropping to dangerously low levels. I need you to channel some heat into her body to keep her temperature stable until I can finish healing the strain on her lungs and heart, the doctor said, making Oven narrow his eyes but nod as he knelt beside the doctor and placed his hand on his sister's arm. So going that far and using a new mirror did this to her? Big Mom asked, looking down at the doctor, who gave a brief nod but didn't look up. Well, not exactly. Ever since her former fiancé tried to kill her, she has had some strain on her heart and lungs. He didn't just scar up her face, but he had stabbed her in the chest, and it had nicked her left lung and barely missed her heart, nicking it as well. Usually it does not bother her unless she fights or runs for extended amounts of time, which due to her powers and her skill in ambush tactics almost never happens. However, using her powers to such a degree had certainly placed an even greater strain on her body, which set her heart in flux and her lung is struggling a bit, the doctor said, making the older siblings exchange wide-eyed looks. They hadn't known their sister had been stabbed in the chest. They thought that the blood on her dress had come from her missing nose or her facial wound. Her pulse is stable now, Colette said, smiling in relief a moment later, her fingers still on her sister's neck where her pulse pointed. Yes, I've managed to coax her heart back into a steady rhythm, but it seems that she has been slowly overexerting herself for the last few years. The small nick in her lung is now an even bigger tear. This most recent trip only ripped it open, but if she kept going the way she had, it would have happened eventually, the doctor said, just as Bruy's eyes opened and she began coughing harshly as she shot up to sit up straight. Sister, Smoothie said, alarmed as she knelt down to offer her sister some water while Prospero and Galette were rubbing her back. What happened? This is the first attack I've had in months, Bruy asked, wiping her hand on her dress after she finished coughing, only to make her siblings recoil slightly at the blood now staining the off-white dress their sister favored. You've overused your devil fruit ability and strained your body, especially your heart and damaged lung. And what do you mean this is your first attack in months? You never came to the doctors or nurses about these attacks, the doctor said, frowning at Bruy, who just shrugged a bit. Sometimes my chest starts hurting and I cough up a bit of blood. It never lasts long and usually happens after a long mission, fight, or training session, so I just ignore it. Thanks, Smoothie, Bruy said, smiling at her taller sister as she took the glass of water and swallowed a few gulps before she shivered a bit. Stupid attacks always leave me cold and faint for at least a day or so afterwards, though, Bruy said, making Oven literally pick her up and settle her on his lap so that he could use his power to help warm his sister's body up. Big brother Oven? Bruy questioned, surprised even as her brother wound his arms around her to keep her in place. How many attacks do you usually have, Bruy? Big Mom asked, her voice and face unreadable as she stared down at one of her craftiest daughters. Usually it only happens once every 5 or 6 months, more if I train or fight for a long time, or if I use my powers for extended amounts of time or across the island. But my last attack was almost a full year ago, so I thought it went away, Bruy said, frowning slightly even as she cuddles closer to her brother. Why did you never tell anyone, sis? Amand asked, earning a small shrug from Bruy. It never came up really, and usually when I have an attack then I'm alone, so no one ever really saw it happen except the homies in Forest and Randolph Sand, Bruy said, trying to keep her eyes open even as she curled into her big brother's warm. What do you recommend for this? Prospero asked the doctor, who was giving Bruy one last look over with his powers. Well, she needs plenty of rest and some fluids, but what has me most concerned is her eating habits, or lack thereof, the doctor said, making Big Mom lean down immediately to stare the doctor in the eyes. Explain. The doctor sweated slightly at the one-word order. It would seem that Lady Bruy has a tendency to not eat a lot for several days at a time, if she eats at all. Her stomach has shrunken to less than half the size it should be for someone of her height and age. Thankfully, it seems she's not heavily malnourished, but if she had gone another day without eating and then tried that journey, she would have collapsed in the mirror world, and I can't say how that would have ended, the doctor said, causing most of the siblings to look shocked or scared at what could have happened to their sister. Bruy, why haven't you been eating? There's plenty of food for everyone, Big Mom asked her daughter in a surprisingly soft voice. Eating disorders were something she took very seriously, especially when it came to her family. Only sweets. Makes tummy hurt. Attacks worse when I eat, Bruy slurred out drowsily as she leaned against her warm and protective brother. You should have told me. We could have had the cooks make something not candy or sweets for you. Deifuku, run to the kitchens and have the cooks start on something not involving sweets. It needs to be small but thick. A soup or something. Big Mom ordered her third son, who nodded and, hesitating for just a second, patted Bruy's head gently before taking off down the hall. Just keep her warm and hydrated, and get some food into her before she goes to sleep, and she should be back to normal by tomorrow morning. No training or missions for at least a week, and no using her devil fruit for 2 weeks. Nothing strenuous for at least a week until I check up on her again, the doctor said, making Big Mom and the other siblings nod as the siblings all gathered around their sister. Most of them felt guilty or were blaming themselves for not noticing that something was wrong with Bruy earlier. They had noticed and even voiced how thin she was compared to the rest of them, but never really paid attention to it. By far out of the Charlotte children who were of age, she was the thinnest and weighed less than Galette or even Em. Why had they never thought to talk to her about it? Here, sis, eat up, Deifuku appeared back in the room holding a steaming bowl of what looked to be a thick soup that had some vegetables and chicken in it. For once the bowl and its contents weren't singing and instead looked rather solemn as the bowl was placed on Bruly's lap. "Thanks," Bruy murmured as she tried to pick up the spoon, but her hand was shaking so much she spilled most of the soup back into the bowl. Her body will be jittery and trembling for a while, as if she were in shock. That should go away as soon as she eats some and her temperature stabilizes, the doctor said before leaving the room, causing Prospero to scooch over closer to his tall sister who looked so small in Oven's lap as he tried to keep her warm. "Come on, sis, open up," Prospero said, taking the bowl and holding the spoon in front of Bruly's mouth. "I can do it, Piros," Bruly said, scowling weakly as she tried to take the spoon, but her hand was still trembling. "Don't be so stubborn, sis. This is no different than the time you fed me soup when I was too sick to do it myself." Prospero scolded his sister, who gave a small snort and a weak giggle. "At least I'm not hallucinating about flying pink mushrooms eating Ammon's sword," Bruly said, earning a snort from Prospero while Ammon gripped her sword's hilt almost protectively. "I don't want to imagine what your mind would come up with, little flower. Now come on. Set a good example for all our baby siblings and open wide," Prospero said, earning a blush and slight glare from Bruly, but there was no real heat to it. "I'm not 5 anymore, goddamn it," Bruly gripped quietly, making Oven snort. His sister hadn't been 5 in a long time, but she sure acted like she was when sick or injured. "Bruly, eat the soup before I give them the order to force feed you." Big Mom finally intervened, making Bruly grumble under her breath a bit before opening her mouth obediently. "Here comes the choo-choo." Prospero couldn't help but tease, making Bruly glare at him as she swallowed the soup. "I will hurt you, brother Piros," Bruly googled weakly as her eldest brother just laughed and fed her another spoonful. "Ouch," Prospero yelped, however, when Galette whacked him upside the head. "It was either I do it, or Sister Bruly, making herself worse by trying to do it herself. Wait until she's allowed strenuous activity again. Then you can provoke her," Galette said with a shrug when they turned to her in surprise and question. "Tamego, spend the rest of the day double-checking the information on Straw Hat Luffy and tell us everything tomorrow morning. Right now Bruly needs our attention and care," Big Mom ordered Tamego, her eyes never leaving her daughter, who was curled up on one older brother's lap while the eldest brother fed her as if she were a child. All of the siblings were looking at and hovering around Bruly protectively, as if she'd shatter any moment, and noticing for the first time just how tall but thin, so painfully thin, her mirror-using daughter was. Big Mom couldn't blame them. She resolved to keep an extra close eye on her children from now on in case any more of them developed eating disorders. She had failed with Bruly, she would not fail again. Even if it meant she had to hold her children down and force-feed them herself, she refused to fail like this ever again. What? Bruly began to wake up, only to nearly shriek when she saw her mother's sleeping face in front of her over the heads of her siblings. "Oh, you're awake," Oven said from behind Bruly, where he had pulled her close to his chest. "Brother, what? Why are we in Mama's bedroom, much less her bed?" Bruly asked, looking at her siblings confused. They were all curled up into a big pile on one of the pillow, with Mama's hand preventing any of them from rolling off the bed, as if she were cradling them. "Well, you were cold still, so I stayed with you, but our siblings wanted to make sure you were okay. We decided to have a sleepover, but Mama wanted to keep an eye on you too, so we stayed in her bed last night," Oven whispered, so that they didn't risk waking up any of their still sleeping siblings or Mama. "But what about our baby brother? What did I miss on the report?" Bruly asked, moving to get up, only for Galette to keep her pinned down with a sleepy grumble and an arm around her sister's waist. "Not much, and Mama gave Tamego until this morning to double-check the information while you recover," Oven said while Deifuku stretched slightly from where he was curled up around their legs. "You should have told us that using your powers so much strained you like that." Deifuku scolded his sister, who just shrugged a little bit. "When I first got my powers, I thought it was just because I was still learning. It wasn't for a few years that I noticed it only happened when I went long distances or to new mirrors. I can go around the islands under Mama's command no problem. It doesn't even strain me a little bit. But using it to go to the East Blue on top of using a new mirror," Bruly admitted while Galette opened one eye sleepily and pinned her sister with a glare. "It's 3 in the morning. Shut up and go back to sleep," Galette grumbled, earning a small snicker from nearby. "Actually, it's 5 now," Ammon corrected her little sister, amused, earning a small smack to the shoulder from an equally drowsy Montdor, who obviously agreed with the Minister of Butter. "Still too early. Go back to sleep," Galette said, cuddling close to Bruly, who just realized that she was laying on top of Prospero. "He refused to let go of you too. We were all really worried, little sis," Oven mumbled at Bruly's look of confusion. "Sorry," Bruly said, feeling guilty but strangely pleased as well. She sometimes questioned if her siblings actually cared about her. She knew in her heart that they did, but sometimes her mind said otherwise. And this was proof that they did care. And Mama, don't apologize, sis. We should have paid more attention and noticed that something was wrong," Prospero was the one to say. earning an agreeing hum or grunt from most of the older siblings that were awake. You're one of the tallest without being part snake neck or long leg. But you're also the skinniest. I can feel your bones when I hug you, sis. That should have been a major warning sign that something was wrong, Prospero said softly as he cuddles his sister, who was a little taller than he was. She was 11 feet and like 9 or 10 inches tall. He was 10 foot 11 himself, so it was a bit awkward to cuddle her like this with the height difference, but it was okay. He didn't mind. He just wanted to make sure his little sister was truly okay. It's time for breakfast. Make sure the kitchen knows to prepare something, not candy or sweets for Bruy. Big Mom said, her voice soft but still naturally loud, waking any of her still sleeping children easily and causing Deifuku to nod as he stood up and jumped off the bed. On it, Mama, Deifuku said, taking off out of the door while all of the siblings began to stand up or stretch a bit, a few jumping off of the bed as they did so. Where do you think you're going, Bruy? Prospero asked when Bruy began walking towards the large mirror in Big Mom's room. Back to my house in the mirror world so I can shower and change clothes, Bruy said, looking at him confused only to yelp slightly when her mother picked her up and settled her back on the bed next to her siblings that were still there. Doctor's orders. No devil fruit usage for 2 weeks, and there's no reason to go back to the mirror world just for that. You still have your room in the castle after all. You can use the shower there and change into any cloths that you left in the closet there. If need be, I'm sure some of your sisters have cloths you can borrow, Big Mom said sternly to her daughter, who looked surprised but nodded slightly. Come on, sis. I have some cloths you can borrow, Smoothie said, being one of the only ones whose cloths would actually fit and dwarf the mirror user. I was hoping to raid Brother Piero's closet for one of his dresses or skirts. Bruy teased her brother, who scowled up at her, although he seemed relieved by the playful teasing. How many times do I have to tell you that those aren't dresses and skirts? They're formal attire suited for. They're dresses and skirts, son. The only one you're fooling is yourself, Big Mom said, amused and making Prospero look betrayed. Mama, Prospero cried in betrayal as he looked at his mother dismayed. Bruy burst out laughing at that, making all of her siblings smile or chuckle a bit as well, while Prospero smiled but hid it as he pretended to sulk. Inwardly, he was glad that his sister was feeling better. Come on, sis. I have some cloths that will fit you and some shampoo and soap you can borrow since all of yours is in the mirror world, Ammon said, smiling at her sister as Bruy moved to the edge of the bed again, only to yelp when Prospero grabbed her and put her on his shoulders. Brother Piero's, I can walk, Bruy said, squirming in her brother's grasp while Oven was already beginning to check his sister over as if looking for injuries again. Nope. You might do something to strain yourself again, Prospero said, making Compote and Ammon exchange amused looks as Bruy sighed slightly. You all are going to act like you did when I first got my scar, aren't you? Bruy asked, even as her younger siblings were led out of the room by a giggling Colette. If you mean you're going to have to deal with us being clingy and possessive and overprotective, yes. The fourth daughter, Ammon's twin sister Eclair, said, grinning at her younger sister. Go on, children. Get ready for breakfast. We'll be hearing more about your brother after we eat. Big Mom shooed the children from her room as she spoke, causing Bruy to hold onto Prospero's head to keep from falling off of his shoulders. This was extremely awkward for her given the height difference, and she couldn't imagine how awkward it was for him for the same reason, but he refused to put her down. Yes, Mama. All of the children dutifully responded as they filed out of the large doors, all heading towards the area of the castle reserved for the Charlotte children that stayed in the shadow. So what do you think we'll learn about our little brother today? Compote asked as the elder children went up to the higher floors where their rooms were located. Maybe how he survived the would-be execution attempt by Buggy, Oven suggested, even as Deifuku met back up with them. Execution attempt? Bruy asked, her voice sharp and cold all of a sudden and making her siblings shiver a bit. Out of all of them, Bruy was the most protective of their younger siblings. And even though Prospero and Ammon had an inkling as to why none of them knew for sure. Sister, nothing strenuous and no devil fruit usage, remember? Compote tried to soothe her sister's rage a bit, or at least calm her down so she didn't have another attack. If I find out that some arrogant clown harmed a hair on our brother's head, I'll make sure I do worse to him than Oven Niisen did to that guy from when I was 23, Bruy said coldly and making everyone wince. Bruy, Oven, and a few others along with some chess peacekeepers had gone on a mission to the Paradise half of the Grand Line when Bruy was 23 to get a rare ingredient. One marine with a strange devil fruit, even by their standards, had taken Bruy by surprise when she was separated from Oven and slammed sea-stone cuffs onto her wrists. The man had been planning to rape Bruy and had ripped her dress. He was about to penetrate her when the chess peacekeepers found them and managed to keep him distracted and away from Bruy until Oven arrived to investigate what was taking his sister so long. Oven saw red when he saw what the man had been about to do. And then Bruy saw red when she saw Oven literally burning and melting the man who had dared try and violate her, without even bothering to try and find the ingredient anymore. Oven bundled his sister back up onto the ship and immediately headed back home. As soon as he explained why they returned without the ingredient, Big Mom had Bruy in her grasp and was looking at her trembling and traumatized daughter worried. "Sister, where is your mind?" Prospero asked, breaking Bruy from her thoughts before she could remember any more of that time, and making her shake her head to clear away any lingering thoughts of it. "Probably got stuck in a mirror," Oven teased gently, glancing worriedly at Bruy. He knew where her mind had been. His had been there too before Prospero's question. "Better than being melted like yours," Bruy responded without missing a beat, earning a snort from Amand and Deifuku both. "Stay in the present, sister. Stay here with us in the now, not in the past," Prospero said, making Bruy relax and nod a little bit. It did no good dwelling on that day and what had almost happened. What could have happened had the chess peacekeepers not been far from her? "Fine, but if I learn someone nearly killed our baby brother when we weren't there to train or protect him, I will go nuts," Bruy said, her voice deadpan and matter-of-fact at the same time. "Only after the doctor says you can, sis. We don't want you having another attack," Compote said calmly. "Not to mention that your recovery will give us time to track them down and plan how to best hit them where it hurts. You're not the only protective one after all," Ammon said, flicking the sword out of its sheath just a little bit and causing Bruy to look at her curious. "Sister Amand, did you sleep with your sword?" Bruy asked, causing the snake neck to pause with a small blush on her face while Compote began snickering. "No," Ammon lied quickly, earning a look from all present siblings. "Seriously, she tried that on the ones that knew her best and could tell when she lied even without their observation. Hacky. You were cuddling it like a teddy bear, Amma," Prospero said, using Ammon's childhood nickname. Bruy busted out laughing again at how red Ammon turned even as she shouted at their big brother, which was out of character itself. "Shut the fuck up, Piros. Big news about Straw Hat Luffy." Tamago came rushing just before breakfast was over as he held a newspaper in one hand and was panting bit to get his breath back. "Finish eating." Big Mom barked at her present children, glaring sternly at all of them and watching as Amand and Prospero were tag-teaming Bruy into eating as much of her eggs and grits and fish breakfast as she possibly could. It was a bit off-putting for most of the siblings to see the mirror user in anything but her favorite off-white dress with the roses. But it was kind of funny to see one of Smoothie's rarely worn t-shirts hanging off their sister's thin frame like a dress. "What is it that's so important it couldn't wait?" Big Mom asked, looking at Tamago sternly. Not only is it confirmed that the missing Vinsmoke is indeed one of his crew members, but it seems that Straw Hat Luffy has taken down Flamingo. Tamago rushed out, making more than a few siblings choke or do a spit take. "Sister breath," Bruy said, looking worried as she slapped the choking Ammon on her back and moved to hand Prospero her napkin since he had been the victim of Oven's spit take. It seemed that Bruy had been one of the few siblings who hadn't been chewing or drinking when Tamago said those words. And thankfully Citron had been chewing instead of drinking, so there was no spit take for her to dodge. "The heavenly demon Flamingo," Big Mom said, knowing about the warlord's reputation and earning a nod from Tamago. "Yes, it seems he and the Surgeon of Death formed an alliance to take him down, but it says that Straw Hat and his crew did most of the fighting," Tamago said, nodding his head rapidly. "Oh, my missing son is so strong," Big Mom said, laughing and sounding proud at hearing her son being able to take down a warlord, even if he did form an alliance to do so. "It did," Katakuri said just before Oven could choke out the question. "His bounty must have skyrocketed after taking down a warlord," Oven said before stopping and giving his brother an annoyed look. 500 million, Katakuri said immediately. "How high?" Deifuku questioned and then sighed. Despite being a set of triplets, he and Oven never real developed their observational haki as much as Katakuri did and didn't ever really get used to him answering questions that haven't been asked yet. That got annoying for them real fast, even if the others thought it was funny. Pretty good for a 19-year-old. The fact that he took down one of the warlords is also impressive, Amand admitted after she cleared her windpipe with Bruy's help. "Actually, it seems he took down at least 2 other warlords," Tamago corrected, earning startled looks and sounds from the others. "He defeated former warlord Crocodile in Alabasta, and there are reports that he defeated Boa Hancock somehow during the War of Best 2 years ago," Tamago explained, causing most men to gape in disbelief at hearing that he took down who was considered to be the most beautiful woman in the world. "Impressive for a rookie raised in the East Blue," Compote noted, smiling slightly while Big Mom was grinning widely. "Of course it is. You forget that he's one of my sons and your brother. East Blue raised or not, he's New World born," Big Mom said with a laugh, proud of her missing son's accomplishment in taking down 3 warlords, one of which was a Loja. "Finish eating, children. Tamago will fill us in as we eat since he's already started," Big Mom said, noticing that her children were staring at Tamago or muttering to each other instead of eating their food. "You need to finish eating, sister. You're already far too skinny," Ammon murmured, glancing at Bruy when their mother told them to finish eating, making Bruy nod and pick at her fish, occasionally eating a bite or two. Well, as I left off yesterday. He was about to be executed in Logtown by Buggy the Clown due to Seastone and the element of surprise. Just before the sword beheaded him, he was grinning, and then he was struck by lightning, but thanks to his devil fruit powers he wasn't injured. Tamago hurried the last bit out when more than a few siblings began to look panicked again. Sure, their mom might not always show that she cared for them all, and when she did, it was in a way that made her seem cruel. But the siblings all loved each other to bits, even if they did have their arguments and fights. After that, he somehow escaped White Chase Smoker and set sail with his crew to the Grand Line, entering by way of Whiskey Peak, a nest of bounty hunters. Reports are unclear, but most say that Luffy didn't have to lift a single finger since his swordsman took all 100 or so of them down by himself. Tamago said, making Big Mom laugh. They were probably a bunch of weaklings that used numbers to their advantage. If my son is as strong as they say, then there would be no need for him to waste his time with cannon fodder, Big Mom said, earning nods from her children. From their well Tamago hesitated at this as he glanced at the siblings and then at Big Mom. Well, spit it out, Big Mom ordered as she finished off a large cake. His crew was seen in the presence of Crown Princess Vivi of Alabasta but she wasn't kidnapped If anything, it seems that he talked her into believing that she should join his crew, Tamago said, making a few of the siblings choke again at that news. If he had kidnapped a princess, that was a big deal itself but for him to talk her into joining a pirate crew, he must be as eloquent as Monty Dore can be, Colette said, wide-eyed and staring at Tamago, shocked. Bruy was one of the best tacticians in the family and rubbed her chin in thought. Her words had everyone wondering if Luffy really thought that way when he did it. I wonder if he was thinking about putting Alabasta under his protection if the princess joined his crew. That would explain a bit about him defeating Crocodile. The warlord was in his way of getting a princess as a crewmate, which would give them some protection from marines and far better service and reputation at several kingdoms and islands. Could it be that their missing brother was a tactician like Bruy and a few other siblings? Mom, I have a mom, Luffy asked, tilting his head and making his crewmates with him face palm. Yes, even Chopper, as Luffy looked up at Big Mom. It was roughly a week after they had beaten Doflamingo, and Katakuri had came and got them just after Sanji had left the crew to go deal with the arranged marriage. Luffy only came along because number 1, Katakuri said that he was Luffy's brother on his mom's side, and number 2, because Katakuri had gotten Sanji back for them. Am I the only one reminded of Water 7 when we ran into Garp? Nami asked, looking at Sanji and Chopper, since Carrot and Brook wouldn't know, who both shook their heads in the negative. How does somebody get a mom? Luffy asked, looking confusedly at his crewmates' reactions. Oh, for the love of Luffy, everyone is born with a mom. Sometimes, though, they lose or are separated from their mom and can be raised by someone else who would then be their new mom. Nami tried to patiently explain it to her idiot captain. Seriously, Luffy, were you raised in a cave or something? Sanji asked, looking at his captain and trying to ignore the beautiful ladies around him. Apparently they were his captain's sisters. That was a strict no-no zone. Nope, we only stayed in them sometimes. Sabo, Ace and I usually stayed in our treehouse since we didn't want to stay with the mountain bandits all of the time, Luffy said, making his crew tense slightly at the mention of Ace's name. None of them said it. None of them even thought of the name around their captain. How could they? They hadn't been there. Mountain bandits. That explains a lot, Nami said, quickly focusing on the less heavy topic. Like his manners and how he eats, Sanji said, agreeing as he lit another cigarette. And yet he can still get girls to fall for him, unlike you, Chopper said dryly and making Sanji glare at him. Hey, Zoro wasn't here, so someone had to do it. Name one, Sanji challenged the reindeer as everyone watched on, amused or confused. Boa Hancock. Rebecca, I'm about 80% sure Carrot likes him, and Vivi too. Those are just off the top of my head, Chopper said, making Sanji begin crying as soon as Hancock's name was out of the reindeer's mouth. It's not fair. That idiot probably doesn't even know the difference between a girl and boy, Sanji cried, pounding his fist on the ground while Nami rolled her eyes. Sure I do. Girls have those balloons on their chests for some reason. Why do you have balloons on your chest, Nami? Is it to protect you if someone tries to hit you? Luffy asked, looking curiously at Nami, who punched him without a second's hesitation. Okay, at that, most of his siblings over the age of 13 busted out laughing at their clueless brother. You idiot, what kind of question is that? I swear you're lucky Robin's not here, or else she'd probably snap your neck for asking that, Nami yelled at Luffy, who rubbed his head and looked at Nami as if she were the dumb one. But Robin never hits me. And I'm rubber, remember. You can't snap a rubber neck, you know. You're kinda stupid, huh, Nami? Luffy asked, looking at Nami, whose eyebrow twitched while Chopper snorted and Brook began laughing. I don't want to hear that from you, Nami yelled at her captain while Sanji was grabbing him by the collar and ready to kick him. Don't talk to Nami Swan like that, you shitty rubber captain, Sanji yelled at Luffy, who looked confused again. You know it's bad when Luffy is calling someone stupid, Chopper said, giggling, and then running to hide behind Carrot when Nami turned towards him. I'll only give you one warning since you're his crewmates, but suddenly Bruy was standing behind Sanji with a shard of glass aimed at his neck while her sisters that used guns had them pointed at the man. Don't you ever hit one of my siblings again. Prospero finished as he had his candy cane pointed at Nami's neck, a few other of the men having their weapons aimed at her too. Consider yourselves lucky, Colette said from where she was ready to bind them at any hostile move. Huh? Chopper asked, looking scared and shocked at how tense and dangerous things had gotten suddenly. We usually don't give warnings, especially Bruy, Prospero Onii-san, and the triplet Onii-sans, Monty Dor said instead while Nami and Sanji were frozen in place looking terrified or at least worried. Why are you so mad at them? It's not like their hits hurt me, Luffy asked confused and showing it by tilting his head to the side as he looked at his apparent sibling. We don't like seeing someone strike our siblings outside of a sparring match, Amanda said from where she was standing beside Luffy with a hand on her blade ready to unsheath it in a moment's notice. Your neck is really long. That's so cool, Luffy said, distracted by his elder sister's long neck. All of them stared at him surprised. Most people not raised around the family or on the islands reacted negatively to things like Amen's long neck. Luffy just seemed amazed. There, now I got one too, Luffy said, grinning widely as he stretched his neck out so that it looked like Amen's and the snake-neck twins. Now we look alike, Luffy cheerfully said as he jumped up and hung off of Amen like a koala. At this, Amen's cigarette dropped out of her mouth as she gaped at her naive little brother. How did you do that? Inanna asked, tugging on Luffy's jeans for his attention, and watching wide-eyed like everyone else as Luffy twisted his neck down and around to look at Inanna even as he still hung off of Amen. I ate the gum-gum fruit so I'm a rubber man, Luffy said, grinning brightly as he stretched one arm and pulled his cheek to past normal human limits. Rubber? What kind of power is that? What can it even do but stretch? One of the sons asked, scoffing and making Luffy grin. Hey Baja, shoot me, Luffy called to the gangster, making everyone choke as he jumped off of Amen. Straw Hat, do you want to die? Baja asked, staring at the boy in disbelief. Well, if I have to do it myself, Luffy sighed as he stole a gun from one guard and placed it to his chest. Wait brother, don't. Bruy began to yell before Luffy pulled the trigger. Everyone watched as he stretched and the bullet rebounded back into the barrel. Stay still or you hurt it all. Do you need anything? A bandage or a blood transfusion? Bruy began fretting over her baby brother immediately as she knocked the gun from his hands. See, I'm fine. Being rubber makes me bulletproof since they just bounce back. I'm also immune to lightning and being hit or kicked unless you use haki. Regular blunt damage does nothing to me, Luffy said, grinning and making Bruy sigh in relief that there was no damage to her baby brother. There goes several years off of my lifespan, Compote muttered as she tried to slow down her racing heart. That sounds like what Daden said first time she saw me do that too. Well, before she clubbed the idiot who shot me, that is. It was kinda funny cause Daden doesn't really like fighting a lot despite being a mountain bandit, Luffy said, laughing and making Amen smile slightly down at him, patting his head gently without removing the hat. Don't scare us like that, little brother. Now why don't you take a seat and tell us about your adventures and where you grew up? Amen asked, earning a tilt of the head from Luffy before he grinned brightly up at her. Sure, I can tell you about my Nakama, and Makino, and Sabo Nyai, and Ace Nyai back when we were little, and Shanks too, Luffy said, making everyone pause at the mention of the other emperor's name. Shanks? You know red hair Shanks? Monty Dor asked, looking at his little brother surprised and earning a bright grin and a nod from the boy. Ooh-huh. He stayed at my village for a year back when I was little, and he saved me from the bandits and the giant Sea King, and he gave me his hat, and it's cause of him that I got my devil fruit, Luffy said brightly and making Big Mom's eyes narrow. Did Shanks know or suspect Luffy of being her son? If he had and never brought it to her attention, she was going to rip his soul from his body next time she saw him. How did he cause you to get your devil fruit? Bruy asked, looking at her little brother confused and a bit concerned. I got mad at him cause he tricked me and then let the stupid bandit make him look like a fool, and so I ate the devil fruit by accident, Luffy said, not losing his smile a bit while Deifuku narrowed his eyes. How do you eat a devil fruit by accident? Deifuku asked, causing Luffy to scratch the back of his head. I didn't know it was a devil fruit and I was angry. I eat when angry, Luffy said, a bit sheepish at that and making Big Mom and most of the Charlotte siblings stare at him for a moment in disbelief before Compote snorted slightly. Yep, he's a Charlotte all right. So tell us about your crew, little brother, Prospero said, looking at Luffy and wondering what his little brother was like and what kind of people he was surrounded by. As the eldest, Prospero was the one who had watched all of his younger siblings grow up and more often than not had protected them until they could protect themselves. He was one of the few sons of Big Mom who was over the age of 20 and unmarried, but he didn't mind. He didn't care about having a wife or any kids of his own. He only cared about making sure his little brothers and sisters were as safe as could be when their mother is a Yonko. He had failed in making sure Bruy stayed safe, but he didn't fail a second time. Anytime one of his siblings, especially his sisters, were arranged to be married, Prospero shadowed them for weeks before he finally deemed whether or not they were worthy of his sister. If they were, he welcomed them to the family with open arms. If they weren't, well, let's just say that the sea was a big graveyard and there were plenty of sharks out by the cliffs. If his brother's crewmates weren't trustworthy with his baby brother, well, the sharks hadn't been fed in a while. Okay, who should I start with? Luffy asked, blinking at his eldest brother and looking curious, making Capote smile warmly down at him. Being the eldest female had meant she had helped Prospero raise most of their younger siblings. This had the added effect of causing her to develop quite the maternal streak, especially around young or innocent people. Out of all of the Charlotte siblings, Capote had been the only one to actually inherit part of their mother's feared iron body. It wasn't to the same degree as her mother's, but she was sturdier than any of her siblings, and with her very advanced armament haki ... she could even give Katakuri a run for his money in a one-on-one fight. How about you tell us how you met them and got them to join your crew? You can even tell us who you met first and go from there, Capote said, making Luffy nod his head happily. That sounded like a good idea to him. Okay, first would be Zoro then. He's my first mate and swordsman, Luffy said, making Ammon look interested in hearing about the man who survived an attack from Mihawk head-on. He uses a 3-sword style, and I met him in East Blue. He made a deal with some Marines so that they wouldn't hurt a little girl and her mother, so he went almost a month without food. In the last week, though, they were going to break the deal and execute him anyways, so I blackmailed him into joining my crew, Luffy said, making Nami and Sanji both gape slightly. Wait, hold on. Let me get this right. You found a bounty hunter who was known as a demon ... and you blackmailed him to get him to join you, Nami asked, staring at Luffy in disbelief and making Luffy nod happily. No wonder neither you nor Zoro ever mentioned how he joined before, Sanji said, putting his face into his hands as he shook his head in disbelief. You didn't ask, Luffy said, simply making Sanji's eyebrow twitch as he refrained from kicking his captain. Is your swordsman strong? Ammon asked, her eyes glinting slightly with the promise of a fight if Zoro was as strong as his bounty made him seem. If so ... she was definitely interested in having at least one fight with him. If he was any good, then she may just be interested in him romantically. She was one of the few daughters who always remained unmarried simply because she didn't want to be held down or backed by someone who was too weak to give her at least a tie in a sword fight. Her mother had reluctantly agreed to that when Ammon had been 24. Perhaps her little brother's crewmate could be someone that was strong enough for her. He's really strong and spent the last 2 years training to be even stronger, Luffy said, nodding his head happily and making Ammon smirk slightly. I'd be interested in seeing how I matched up against him in a sword-only fight, Ammon said, earning raised eyebrows from the older siblings that knew of her condition to be even remotely romantically interested in anyone. After Zoro, we met Nami, but she didn't join us officially until later ... so ... next would be Usopp. He's our liar, Luffy said, grinning and making his crewmates slap their foreheads. He's the sniper, Nami clarified at the looks of confusion and disbelief on the others' faces. Yeah, and he's really good too. He's able to hit almost any target from almost any distance now that he has his observation haki up and going. We met him when we were looking for a bigger ship, and his childhood friend was the heiress of a boating company. She was being threatened by some jerk named Kuro though, so we kicked his and his crew's butts and she made our first ship for us. The Going Merry, Luffy said happily and earning a few hums from his siblings, but no one really said anything yet. After Usopp was Sanji. He's our cook, Luffy said, pointing up at Sanji, who took a puff of his cigarette and ruffled Luffy's hair a bit. The battered and bruised Yanji looked like he would sneer if his lip wasn't busted, along with his nose and probably his jaw too. Sanji had let him off easily. Ryuju just smiled fondly at her blonde-haired brother. Pudding, however, looked interested in the man that had been arranged to be her husband. He fights with his legs, and when we met him I had to work at the Barady with him cause I accidentally hit him with a cannonball. The Marine lieutenant, nobody shot at us, Luffy said, making Nami and Sanji both snicker. His name was Fullbody, Sanji corrected easily, although amused. Yeah, him. I kept trying to get Sanji to join my crew, but he kept refusing. So I kept refusing his refusals. Here Ryuju's eyebrow twitched, since that was what the straw hat wearing boy had done to her. Barady was attacked by Krieg, so we beat him up and then Sanji joined us, Luffy said simply and making Sanji's sweat drop slightly. Talk about simplifying things and leaving out a lot of stuff. After Sanji is when Nami officially joined us. She's our navigator, and she was forced to work under some jerk named Arlong who kept spouting how he was 10 times stronger than me and he would use Nami to take over the oceans, Luffy said, scrunching his nose up slightly at the mention of Arlong and making Nami look away. I beat up Arlong and my crewmates beat up his crew, so Nami was free. And then she joined us. She's a really good thief too, so she keeps stealing things from other people ... but she's really nice to kids, and also she's not that bad, Luffy said, grinning up at Nami, who raised an eyebrow and then just shook her head amused. That's when we headed to the Grand Line and met Chopper. Nami was really sick, so we had to find a doctor, and so Sanji and I climbed a mountain to get to the witch doctor lady so she could help Nami. Chopper is a really cool little reindeer who ate the human fruit, and he's also a doctor. He's going to be the best doctor in the world, Luffy said, smiling brightly as he grabbed Chopper and pulled him down into a hug, causing the little reindeer to blush brightly and do his little wiggle dance while insulting Luffy. Cute, Anana said, smiling a bit as she reached over and poked Chopper, who turned even redder and kept wiggling again. After Chopper we got Robin. She was working for Crocodile, but he stabbed her in the back, and when I beat him up she joined our crew. She's the arch. Luffy trailed off as he tried to think of the word, making Ryuju giggle as he turned red with the force of trying to think. Don't hurt yourself, Captain. She's an archaeologist, Sanji said, amused and making Luffy nod and snap his fingers. Yeah, that thing. She likes old things and freaking out people. She can also grow a bunch of hands or legs or eyes anywhere she wants. She tried keeping us safe from the world government once by leaving, but we kicked their ass and got her back, Luffy said, grinning widely at the end, his eyes a bit sharper than normal at that. Then there's Frankie, he's the shipwright. We met him when we went to save Robin, and he built us a new ship after going Mary died. He built the Thousand Sunny and joined our crew after Robin managed to force him into it, Luffy said, although he didn't look bothered even as Chopper and Sanji bothered shuddered in horror. I think that's the main reason she was called a devil, Sanji said, making Luffy laugh at them. He was glad he didn't have to worry about what she had done to Frankie happening to him. Why are you laughing, you moron? What she did would hurt any man, Sanji yelled at Luffy, who laughed harder and grinned widely up at his cook. But I'm rubber. Even if she tried, I wouldn't feel any pain unless she used hacking, Luffy said, making Sanji pause for a moment, and then he looked torn between being glad for his captain or kicking him. What did she do? Colette asked, amused and confused as she looked at the crew, making Luffy crack up again while the other two males winced and cowered away. She bloomed two hands and squeezed them so hard we thought they would pop, Nami said, unbothered really, and making everyone look confused for a moment before Big Mom got what they meant and began laughing. You don't mean? Brooke stared at Nami in disbelief and horror, earning a solemn nod from Sanji. Yo ho ho ho, for once I'm glad I don't have those anymore. That would hurt most any man, Brooke said, covering himself protectively, or he would if he had anything there to cover. Instantly the other men understood, and all of them looked horrified, even those with Loja abilities. Well, that's one way to keep a man under control, or to have one do as she says, Smoothie said, more amused than anything, while her slightly younger long-legged sisters nodded dumbly in agreement. The triplets were more than used to men with leg obsessions lusting after them, but they never thought of using that method to make the men back off. Usually Prospero and the triplet boys handled it if the men got too pushy. Then after that we met Brooke. He was stuck in the Floridian Triangle with that lizard guy who kept taking people's shadows. So we kicked lizard guy's ass and got everyone's shadows back. Then he joined us. He's a really good musician and swordsman too, Luffy said, pointing up at Brooke, who let out a laugh and tipped his hat to them all. And then after we spent 2 years training, we went to Fishman Island, where we met up with Jimb again. He's going to be part of our crew too, but he said he had to do something important first and fulfill his obligations, whatever that means. I just know that means he can't join us right now, but that's okay. We'll wait, cause he'll join us eventually, Luffy said, smiling brightly as he finished up the tale, causing his crewmates to give him flat looks. I know he has a habit of oversimplifying things, but really? Nami asked in disbelief as she looked at her captain, who was distracted by stretching his legs out so that he was as tall as Smoothie, Citron, and Cinnamon, and laughed about it. It's the guy with the brain of rubber. What do you expect? Sanji asked, raising an eyebrow at Nami, who sighed slightly. To actually mention that we fought an army of fishmen, saved a couple of islands, made friends with more than a few members of royalty, and literally declared war on the world government. I know that he doesn't think much of it since we were doing it for our friends and Nakama, but don't you think his family would like to know? Nami asked, making everyone freeze aside from Luffy, who was giving Anana and Chopper a piggyback ride. The shouts of the siblings and Big Mom was heard clear to Fishman Island, it seemed. Hey did what? I won't go easy on you, little brother. Are you ready? Prospero asked as he and Ammon stared down Luffy, who had been eager to fight both of them but couldn't pick who to fight first, so he ended up challenging them both to a spar, and they were amused enough by his behavior to oblige him. You don't do anything by halves, do you, runt? Ammon asked, amused as she looked at her little brother, who was bouncing on the toes of his feet as they stood across from each other in the training area reserved for the Charlotte sibling. The rest of the siblings and Big Mom were gathered in the outside reaches of the training area to watch as two of the strongest fighters raised in the family faced down a fighter raised outside of the family. Luffy's crew that were present were gathered around to watch as well, wondering how their captain would fare. Now that's no fun. Now can we start yet? Luffy asked, bouncing happily on his toes with a bright grin that had even Ammon smiling at him, and she almost never smiled. Candy Wall. Prospero launched a wall to trap his brother so that Ammon could get in a good hit with the flat of her blade and they could end this farce. After all, his brother might be strong, but he certainly wasn't strong enough to take on both of them at the same time. Giant pistol. Luffy tried to punch his way through the wall, only for his punch to barely dent it before he felt a presence behind him. Slow waltz, Ammon intoned as she swung her sword, trying to hit her brother with the flat. Thanks, sis, Luffy cheered as he jumped over the sword swing, watching as it got stuck in the candy since she wasn't using the sharp edge. Sorry, Luffy belatedly apologized when he kicked Ammon in the back at the same time that Prospero lowered the wall so she could get her sword free. Ammon was knocked forward and almost ended up skewering her elder brother as she was launched forward by the kick that took her by surprise. Watch it, Prospero said, barely avoiding the blade and instead getting knocked over by his sister's body weight. Apologies, Brother Pyros. He took me by surprise. Ammon apologizes as she rights herself and straightens up, turning to look at her little brother again. I underestimated you, little brother. I won't make that mistake twice, Ammon said to Luffy as she and Prospero stood back up side by side again. It's okay, a lot of people do that. Most are trying to kill me though, so they don't really make that mistake twice, well, except for Crocodile, Luffy said, shrugging slightly and earning a narrowing of the eyes from his siblings. They'd have to get the details of that out of him later. Slow serenade, Bruy intoned as her sword began to hum slightly as if it were singing. Luffy gave a small yawn and Prospero launched a ball of candy at him. Candy shot, Prospero cried out, making Luffy jump over it immediately before having to duck under another swing of Ammon's sword as she appeared behind him without a sound. Luffy was kicked, however, and the flat of the blade almost hit him in the head until he blocked it with his sandal while on the ground. Doing a bit of a handstand spin, he kicked Ammon's sword up and out of her grasp, landing another kick to his sister's stomach that sent her in the way of Prospero's next candy shot. Brother Pyros, get me out of here, Ammon called, scowling as she tried to get the candy off of her, although thankfully her hat kept it from getting on her face. Ammon, Prospero said, alarmed at hitting his sister by accident as he quickly dissolved the candy, but his mistake was taking his eyes off of Luffy. Katakuri cried out a warning that came just a second too late. Gum gum, Red Hawk, Luffy cried, hitting his older brother and sister both with the flaming fist, burning right through the candy that covered them both, even though he didn't know of Prospero's candy armor. How? You have rubber powers. How did you catch on fire? Ammon asked, even as she quickly forced the now melted candy off of her cloths and hands. Oh well, it's kinda easy, see, Luffy began to say with a wide grin on his face before a rock hit him in the head. You idiot. Don't go telling them about your attacks while you're fighting with them, Nami shouted at Luffy, who blinked for a second before shrugging. Okay, Luffy agreed readily while Prospero and Ammon both were scowling at Nami, as were a few of the other Charlotte siblings. Come on, let's get serious, Luffy said, grinning as he got ready to fight against his siblings again, focusing more on Prospero. Why are you not attacking me? Ammon asked, frowning at her younger brother as he began trying to fist fight Prospero while ignoring her for the moment. You're a swordswoman. You fight with your sword. I don't want to fight you when you're at a disadvantage. That's no fun, Luffy said, frowning at her for a second and not looking bothered by the fact that Prospero took that advantage to smack him in the head with the cane. Nay, Luffy stuck his tongue out at his brother, who looked surprised by how unaffected Luffy was. I'm rubber. You gotta do better than that if you want to hurt me with a fist, Luffy said, grinning and decking Prospero in the face with a loud crunch sound that had a few siblings wincing. It's been a while since someone broke through my candy armor and damaged my body. Hikukuku, Prospero laughed as he picked himself up and stifled his bloody and possibly broken nose. You were wearing armor. Luffy was confused and then had to quickly duck under another sword swing from Ammon. Gum gum whip, Luffy called out as he slammed his stretched out leg into Ammon's side, only to hit the blade of her sword, although the force of it did push her a bit. Candy wave, Prospero launched a giant wave of candy at Luffy and Ammon, causing Ammon to slice through the bit of it aimed at her just enough for her to not get hit. It melted when I hit it with Red Hawk ... so then ... let's try this out, Luffy murmured to himself as he watched the wave approach. Katakuri's mouth dropped open a little bit in disbelief as he saw what was about to happen. Gum gum, giant Red Hawk Gatling, Luffy yelled as he enlarged both of his fists and coated them in haki. Prospero and Ammon both had to duck and dodge and weave around the bits of flying melting candy that were broken off by Luffy's attack. Do you guys remember him being able to do that before? Nami whispered to the others, earning a laugh from Brook and a note from Sanji. So we do the usual. Act unsurprised and as if we already knew, Sanji asked, earning a nod from the others as Prospero and Ammon were staring at their brother in shock. Shishishishi, I can't believe that actually worked, Luffy said, laughing as he stood untouched in the middle of a large amount of melted or melting candy. And he blew it, Nami muttered, face palming. Looks like little brother is smarter than he lets on, Bruy said, amused and amazed at just how powerful and clever her little brother seemed to be. With a bounty of 500,000. He must have hidden some of his intelligence and let everyone underestimate him. You don't get that high up without some brains to back up your skill and strength, Smoothie said, watching interested as the three began fighting again. Luffy being given a much easier time of it since it seemed that Prospero and Ammon were having a hard time working together without hitting the other or getting in the other's way. Shishishishi. This was fun. Thanks, Luffy said, laughing as Ammon was trapped in a candy net that was meant for Luffy while her sword had Prospero pinned to a tree that was wailing in pain. The only reason he couldn't get the sword out himself is because it pinned one of his arms and was dangerously close to his neck while the other hand was having a hard time of trying to get to it without risking slitting his own throat. Luffy ran over to pull the sword out and then went and chewed through the candy on Ammon until she could cut herself free. Luffy grinned as he hugged both of his siblings before his stomach growled, making some people stare at him in disbelief. He really is a Charlotte. He might even be on par with Mama's appetite. Bruy muttered to Katakuri as Luffy turned to his chef, who merely sighed. Now I'm hungry again. Sanji meat, how did you beat us so easily? We aren't sweet commanders, but we're still some of the strongest of the family, Prospero asked, looking at his little brother who was scarfing down a large plate of meat that Sanji had made for him in record time. You two weren't working together. Besides, it was just one of me versus both of you. I didn't have to worry about hurting my friends or avoiding their attacks, Luffy said easily before stuffing an entire ham into his mouth and swallowing it all in one bite, much to most of the siblings' disbelief. I see. We were at a disadvantage from the start since we kept getting in each other's way. It didn't help that I underestimated you and paid the price for it, Ammon said, her eyes narrowing a bit as she realized that she and Prospero almost never fought alongside each other. Both of them were more than enough alone to take out most challengers, so they never had need to team up before. Their clashing fighting styles and the fact that they had to worry more about hitting each other than hitting their younger brother meant that they were doomed from the start. That's okay though. I could tell you're both really strong. Now you can just get stronger and we can spar again whenever you want, Luffy said, grinning widely up at his sister, who gave a small smile as she patted his head, which made him smile even wider. Did he plan that? Using their numbers and lack of coordination against them? Evan asked, looking at the beaming boy wide-eyed. Only for Luffy's crew to hear him. Luffy, planning something. The day that happens, pigs will be flying, Nami said with a snort, although she was smiling fondly at her captain. You call me? Luffy asked around a mouthful of food as he perked up, looking up from his meat to his nakama. And yes, that sounded better in my head, but I'm not fixing it. No, Luffy, don't worry about it, Nami said, smiling at her captain, who just grinned up at her as he swallowed his mouth full in one gulp. Okay, Luffy said with a grin that possibly contained 2/3 the radiance of the sun before he went back to eating. He has quite the appetite, doesn't he? Colette asked, giggling a bit and earning snorts from Luffy's crew. You have no idea, Sanji said, lighting Anther's cigarette while Chopper frowned a bit and tilted his head. Although it's not really his fault. Luffy is made of rubber. Fighting, walking, fishing, all of it ... Even just existing and breathing for him takes up at least 3 times the energy than a normal person. Naturally, to counter that, he needs more food than most people, Chopper said, explaining it a bit and making the Charlotte siblings look worried. Their brother used up that much more energy than them just by existing. Wait, you mean he was using 3 times the energy we were, and yet he still beat us so easily? Prospero asked, staring in surprise and disbelief at the tiny reindeer doctor. And boy, was Mama happy to see that strange of a creature. Well, I don't know how to compare your energy usage to his since you use candy, and I've never examined a snake neck before, but he does use more energy than most, Chopper said, nodding to the eldest male sibling and making jaws drop open. Way to go, little brother, Ammon said finally as she patted Luffy's head, making him look up at her and then grin brightly. It feels weird having sisters. I'm used to just having brothers. Nice ... but weird, Luffy said, smiling brightly up at his sister, who blinked a little and then just smiled softly in return, which really surprised most of the siblings. Aside from Bruy and those older than her, none of her siblings had ever seen Ammon smile before. Brothers, Oven prompted, wanting to know if there was just more than the now deceased Fire Fist Ace in the picture. Ace Nai was my big brother, and Sabo Nai is too. I thought Sabo Nai was dead for a long time, but turns out he's alive, so I still have a big brother ... Wait ... You guys were always my brothers ... So I still had a big brother I knew about, Luffy said, correcting himself a bit at the end as he realized something. You just realized that? Not very smart, are you, runt? Cracker asked, looking at his brother, who just blinked and then shook his head. Not thinking hurts. I'll let the others do that. I just make decisions and punch things, Luffy said, not bothered at all with how hard it was for him to think, while Chopper cleared his throat again to gain their attention. Luffy is made of rubber. Rubber doesn't conduct electricity much, if at all. The brain uses electric signals to communicate with the body and process information. Naturally, with his whole body being rubber, not only does he use more energy than most people, but he also has a very hard time of thinking due to the rubber blocking the electrical signals to his brain. This could also contribute to his physique as well, Chopper said, making even the crew members that were there look at him curiously at the last bit. What do you mean contribute to his physique? Nami questioned as she looked between her captain and the ship's doctor. Well, rubber is ... not very malleable. It can be cut and all, and it can stretch, but it always returns to its original shape unless completely torn ... However, ... it also takes a lot to change the original shape of rubber once it's formed. Luffy, you ate your devil fruit back when you were young, right? Chopper asked, looking to his captain for verification and earning a nod. Yeah, it was before Gramps left me with Daden and the rest of the bandits, so I was only 7. Luffy said, making his crewmates twitch a bit at the mention of him being raised by bandits, especially from such a young age. Now, if you were to touch Luffy's skin aside from where it was scarred, you will find that while rubbery, it is still rather soft to the touch, like a child's. Also, in case you haven't noticed, most of the Charlottes that are Luffy's age, even the ones without being long leg or something along those lines, all of them are extremely tall, and Luffy barely comes up to their knees. This could be because his rubber body has negated most of his growth. This also means that he won't ever really age or grow like the rest of us do, since, as I mentioned earlier, rubber hardly ever changes its original form. If he were to somehow lose his rubber ability while still being alive, then I suspect that he would be hit with a long overdue growth spurt till he is around the similar height as some of his siblings closer to his age, Chopper said, finishing up and making most of the siblings blink slightly as they tried to work that out, while a few nodded in understanding, knowing that most all devil fruits did impact the body in some way or form. Huh, no wonder why you were the least changed out of all of us after we had met up again, Nami said, poking Luffy's cheek and earning an odd half-chirp noise of confusion from the boy who blinked up at her. Just finish your meal, Captain, Nami said, smiling fondly as she kissed his forehead, making him grin brightly up at her and nod. You two are together? Capote asked, looking between the two and earning a laugh from Nami and Brook, while Sanji was glaring slightly at his captain, and Chopper just giggled before climbing up into Luffy's lap. No, nothing like that. Luffy belongs to everyone in the crew. Naps with Zoro, story time with Robin, playing with Chopper and Usopp. Everything. He belongs to all of us. Here Nami switched her gaze from fondness towards her idiot captain to coldness and steeliness as she glared up at his siblings. And we're very possessive of our captain. Like captain, like crew after all, Nami said, her smile colder than before and making a few of the siblings lean towards her, intrigued, or lean away from her warily. Like captain, like crew, Smoothie echoed, raising an eyebrow at the smaller, much smaller, girl who, while having acted scared earlier, seemed to have no fear now as she stared them all down. I believe she's referring to how possessive Luffy is of his crew members. He utterly destroyed Arlong single-handedly before we were anywhere near the Grand Line just cause he made Nami cry. Among a few other things, he beat up the warlord Crocodile because Vivi asked him for help. He took down Don Flamingo to help Law and Viola, and Rebecca took down Moria to help Brook. Sanji listed a few of them off as he exhaled a bit of smoke, earning surprised and slightly amazed looks from the younger siblings, while the older ones were just looking at Luffy in disbelief and slight amazement as well. Hearing about it in a report was one thing. Hearing about it from someone who was there when it happened, that just confirmed it. Not to mention what happened with Robin. Chopper reminded them from Luffy's lap, where none of the hastily eaten food or flying hands hit him, Luffy knowing that he was there and keeping his little buddy safe. Robin-san, Brook asked, confused and earning a look from Nami. Oh yeah, that was just before we met you actually, Brook. Like literally maybe 2 weeks apart, Nami said in realization and earning a tilt of the skull from Brook. Yeah, CP9 took Robin from us, forcing her to give herself over to them for death in order to save us from a buster call. We didn't take that lying down, Sanji said, a cold smirk on his lips as his eye glinted a bit. Luffy stormed an Ice lobby all by himself and took down at least half of the Marines before we even got there, and went after CP9 together, Chopper said with a dark giggle that had everyone staring at him shocked except for his crew. The looks on the Marines' faces when Luffy ordered Usopp to shoot down their flag ... HMPA. It's like they didn't expect us to wage war against the world for one of our own, Sanji said with a small sinister snicker, while the pirates around them that weren't part of their crew were shocked and horrified and impressed. Even Big Mom looked shocked and impressed by what her son had done for just one crew member, one who was known to backstab any crew she joined at that. Not to mention they didn't expect us to win. They should know better than to underestimate us. It didn't hurt that Spandam had pushed the button for the buster call. We might not have blown up Anai's lobby ourselves, but... Here Nami trailed off with a darkly sadistic giggle as her eyes too glinted dangerously. Everyone except the Straw Hats were surprised when Luffy finished it all off with a dark possessive tone to his voice that stunned his family. The Straw Hats present looked more like demons than pirates, with the dark looks on their faces and the gleams in their eyes. Even Luffy wasn't sparred from looking like a demon. We were damn sure thinking about it. No one takes one of ours and gets away with it. No one. So are you going to join my crew, son? Linlin asked, looking at Luffy with a wide grin on her face at how strong her missing son was. He was certainly strong enough to be a sweet commander. Why would I want to do that? Luffy asked, confused as he looked at his mother with his brow furrowed. You're my son, Linlin said, frowning as she looked at him now while he looked confused even more than before. So what? Luffy asked, confused. All of my children join my crew, Linlin said, her eyes narrowing at Luffy, who just picked his nose, causing his siblings to facepalm or look disgusted. So, Luffy asked, unbothered. So you're my child. You join my crew, Linlin said bluntly, and making Luffy pull a face. No, the king of pirates can't have a captain, Luffy said, as if this were a commonly known fact. His siblings all went wide-eyed or stiffened at that as they stared at their brother, while Big Mom paused for a moment. Pirate king. So you're trying to become the ruler of the seas, Linlin said, making Luffy frown and tilt his head, confused. Ruler? I don't want to rule anything. Don't you know? Luffy asked, smiling slightly as he looked up at his mother, who blinked at this. Her son wanted to be a king but not a ruler. Being the king of pirates means being the free ESD person in the world, Luffy said with his brightest grin on his face. So you don't want to be anything but free? Cinnamon asked, looking surprised and earning a nod from Luffy and an even brighter smile. Right, that's what being a pirate is about. Being free and following your dreams, Luffy said with a grin that was as bright as the sun and earning fond smiles from his crew. Don't you have a dream? Luffy asked, looking at his mom and siblings, who all frowned for a minute. Building a country where everyone can be treated equally, whether they're fishmen or long leg or long arm or even three-eye. Big Mom was the first to speak, and making her children look up at her surprised and earning a wide grin from Luffy. That's a great dream. Treating people bad because of the way they were born is stupid. I mean, Chopper is a blue-nosed reindeer, but he's the best doctor ever, Luffy said, picking Chopper up and earning a blush and wiggle from the doctor, who was calling him an asshole. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I agree with the shitty captain, Sanji said, jabbing his thumb at Luffy and immediately being sent flying by a hard punch to the face by Praline. No one insults one of my siblings in front of me, Praline growled dangerously at Sanji. Shishishishi. Sanji got his ass kicked. Luffy just pointed and laughed at his cook's misfortune while Chopper rushed over to the blonde, who stood up and brushed off his suit. Luffy, usually you're the first to start fighting when someone attacks our crew, Nami said, looking at her captain surprised, even as she had brought out her upgraded climb attack. But Sanji's not hurt. He dodged most of it, Luffy said with a grin, even as Sanji worked his jaw for a minute as he walked back over. Nice hit. I had that coming, I suppose, Sanji said, nodding to Praline and not looking bothered in the least bit at how easily he was sent flying just now. How'd you feel if we insulted your siblings right in front of you? Amin asked from where she was standing beside Luffy with one hand on his shoulder and one on her sword hilt. If it was my brothers, I'd probably agree with you. My sister, though. I see your point, Sanji said, even as he let Chopper fuss and rub some bruise cream on his cheek. So you have a dream then? Big Mom asked, looking at Luffy, who grinned up at her again. Yep, me and my whole crew have dreams. I'm going to be the king of pirates, Luffy said, making his crewmates shake their heads slightly in fondness. Brook just laughed. Finding the all blue, Sanji said, smiling fondly at his captain. Making a map of the whole world, Nami said excitedly, lowering her baton. Finding a cure for every disease, Chopper said, beaming up at them all. Reuniting with an old friend and keeping a promise, Brook said, leaning against his guitar. Pretty lofty dreams, Smoothie said, making Luffy twist his head around near 180 degrees to smile at her. The fuck? Flamb yelped, jumping away from the straw hat wearing boy, while more than a few cringed or recoiled at the owl-like action. Flamb. Language around the little ones, Big Mom chided immediately as she glared at her near Firefly daughter. Shishishi. You're all weird, Luffy said with a laugh, and not seeming to care about the looks of disbelief, disgust, and horror he was getting from several of his siblings. If you won't join us, then what about an alliance? Big Mom asked, looking back at Luffy, who grinned at her. Okay, Luffy agreed with a ready shrug, earning face palms from all of his present crew members. Most of our alliances are sealed with marriage, however. Big Mom trailed off as she thought about that for a minute. Did I miss a meeting? Jim's voice called from behind Big Mom, causing everyone to look towards him and for Luffy to beam with 2/3 the radiance of Prometheus. Jim, Luffy cried as he rocketed himself straight at the fish man, who caught him effortlessly. Luffy-kun, Jim said, shocked to see the boy, who was now wrapping his extended arms around Jim's neck in a hug. Are you going to join my crew now, Jim, or do you still have to do that important thing? Luffy asked eagerly with wide bright eyes. Join your crew? Prospero asked, looking from Jim to Luffy, causing Luffy's head to twist around as he beamed at his eldest brother. Yeah, Jim promised to join my crew after he did something really important. I've been asking him to join almost since we met in Impel Down, Luffy said with a bright grin and earning a twitch from one of his siblings at the mention of Impel Down. His assembled crew's faces going blank. We heard you had broken out of Impel Down. Smoothie trailed off slightly as she eyed her brother, who nodded his head. Yeah, I broke in with some help to try and save Ace, but that stupid Maggie guy and those wolves poisoned me and was trying to hurt Bon-chan, but Eva-chan saved us. While I was getting better, they moved Ace out, but I didn't know it, so when we got to that level, we let out some of the other prisoners and broke out. Jim was there and he helped me lots with both Impel Down, Marineford, and at Amazon Lily after the war was over. Luffy said, nodding his head and not looking bothered as he casually mentioned the war where he lost his older brother, causing his crew to flinch slightly but smile as they walked over to Jim. It's great to see you again so soon, Jim. It seems like it wasn't but a week ago we were at Fishman Island fighting against Horty with you and you were giving Luffy a blood transfusion. Nami said, her smile warm and soft as she walked up to Jim, who smiled back at her. It is wonderful to see you all as well, but I was not expecting you so soon. How did you get here before I did? Jim asked, looking at them all and making them all look at Nami, who rolled her eyes. It's a story that could only happen to Luffy, Nami said, earning a solemn nod of understanding from the large blue shark man. That's it, Big Mom said, perking up as she thought of something, making all of her children jump or tense and look at her. She said nothing about how Bijah stepped in front of Chiffin almost protectively or about how Jim had quickly covered the Straw Hats protectively as well. What is it, Mama? Capote asked, looking at her mother, who grinned. Instead of a marriage to seal the alliance, Jim can join Luffy's crew as a liaison, Big Mom said, making Jim pause as he looked between Luffy and Big Mom. Alliance? Jim questioned, looking at Nami and Sanji for a straight answer since Luffy would only confuse him more. Oh, that's right, you weren't here for that Luffy-ranked cannon blast, Nami said, realizing that Jim wouldn't realize what had happened. The others were more than a bit amused at the face Jim pulled at the news Sanji had bluntly delivered while lighting a cigarette. Jim, meet Luffy's mother, Big Mom. Big Mom, I thought we were marrying Sanji to your daughter, Judge asked, narrowing his eyes when he and the rest of the Germa royalty arrived just a few days later, around the same time as the underworld leaders for the tea party that was originally for the wedding. Ah, but some new information has come to light, Big Mom said, earning tense muscles from the Germa group, wondering if they had done something to displease her. Well, Big Mom's hand shot out instantly at the cry and she caught Bruy and Luffy as soon as they popped out of one of the upper floor mirrors. Having fun, you two? Big Mom asked, amused as she looked at the two who were cradled in her large hand. The two of them had gotten close quickly, Luffy giving his older sister the new nickname of Twig, much to her apparent irritation, and Bruy seemed to have fun trying to figure out her brother and showing off her powers to him since he always seemed amazed. We were in the mirror world on a tour when he had the idea to try and slingshot into a mirror, and he took me along for the ride, Bruy said, rolling her eyes but smiling slightly at her younger brother's antics. The older siblings thought his childish antics were cute and kind of nice to see on a family member, and the younger siblings thought it was awesome how he would always play with them and make them laugh with his antics. Excuse me, Mama, but have you seen? Oh, there you are, Ammon said, spotting her brother in her mother's hand. Hi, Amma. Luffy waved to the hat-wearing Snake Neck, who gave a soft smile at the nickname as her brother used his gum-gum rocket to launch forward and wrap around her in a hug that she gladly returned. Come on, little brother. We're supposed to spar today, Ammon said, smiling softly down at her little brother, who grinned back up at her. Luffy and his few crewmates on the island were at first just going to sail off to Wano to meet with the rest of their crew, but his siblings and mother had talked Luffy into waiting a while until they could deal with the arranged marriage and Luffy could get to know his new brothers and sisters. Snack time, Sanji said, smiling as he entered the room holding a tray in each hand, pausing for a moment as he noticed his former family. Glaring at them for a split second, Sanji ignored them when the chess peacekeepers brought in a large tea cake for Big Mom. The snack time was something Chopper and some of the medics under Big Mom agreed was a necessary thing to start up. Not only would it counter the higher metabolism of Luffy and quite a few of his siblings, but it would also help the ones that were lighter for their height and energy usage get up to proper weight. Big Mom was shocked and a bit amused, but mostly shocked when Chopper gave her a ranting to end all rantings on how just sugary things and candy was no way to eat. She had been especially sobered when he began listing all of the health issues that could pop up because of lack of proper nutrients. Meat? Ammon and Luffy asked immediately with hopeful looks in their eyes. Turns out the oldest of the snake-neck Charlottes was just as much of a carnivore as her rubbery little brother, and she had taught herself how to cook meat dishes just enough for them to be not dripping with blood but still rarer than most could stand. Good thing she got a few more snake traits than just her neck, otherwise all of the nearly raw meat she ate would give her a hell of a lot of health problems. For the two lovely ladies, I have grilled chicken with lemon seasoning and sauteed green beans, Sanji said as a table was brought out and set up, allowing him to set down the platter and taking the cover off of it to show the delicious smelling chicken for the women. For my captain, I have salted ham with some garlic mashed potatoes. Bon appetit, Sanji said, setting down the other tray and taking the top off of it. Yeah, Sanji's food is the best, Luffy cheered as he near-tackled his cook, who immediately sidestepped the near-tackle hug. He's certainly better at cooking meats and veggies than our chefs. Ammon agreed as she fixed a healthy-sized helping for Bruy before fixing her own plate. The chicken was cooked a bit more than Ammon cared for, but her younger sister needed to eat it too so she could deal with it being not bloody enough for her animalistic side. Getting Bruy up to a healthy weight and trying to keep her from suffering more attacks, or at least harsh ones, was much more important than Ammon's preferred food. Here. Bruy agreed, although she rolled her eyes a bit at how her sister was making sure she was eating still. For over a week now, most of her siblings, but especially the older ones, were making sure she was eating 3 full meals a day, and usually snacks like these as well. Even her newly reunited baby brother was making sure she ate and had given his crew orders to make sure she ate and was taken care of after the first time they saw her having an attack while she was sparring with Nami. Sanji, you're a prince. Why are you cooking like some civilian or common worker? The blue-haired boy who looked a lot like Sanji demanded, even as Sanji lit a cigarette looking unbothered. I'm a cook. I feed whoever is hungry. Besides, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't you the queen of TotoLand, Madam Charlotte? Sanji asked, glancing up at Big Mom to specify which female Charlotte he was talking to. Yes, I am. Big Mom agreed with a nod of her head as she finished off the tea cake, watching the Vinsmokes carefully. Then that makes these 2 lovely ladies princesses, and my captain, a prince. Besides ... in case you've forgotten ... you disowned me a long time ago, and I disowned you all the minute the shitty old geezer took me in. Sanji said, blowing out a trail of smoke as he switched his words when he noticed Ammon reaching for her sword with narrowed eyes. So as far as I care, I'm just a pirate cook raised by East Blue fighting chefs. I'm just a pirate looking for the all blue while making sure the future pirate king and his crew are well fed. Sanji said with a casual shrug of his shoulders while Luffy finished off the last of his snack and grinned as he latched onto his cook. The king's cook. Luffy cheered as Sanji tried to untangle his captain from his body, although his heart wasn't in it and it was obvious to see that. Yeah, I'm the king's cook. Now get off of me, Sanji said, smiling slightly as he ruffled Luffy's hair a bit and finally untangled the rubbery limbs. So who are the off-color Sanjis? Luffy asked, blinking at the Germas who were staring at him, 2 of them looking disgusted, 1 unbothered, and the sole female looked curious. Show respect to your betters, brat. Yanji sneered at Luffy, making Ammon's hand shot to her sword while Bruy stood slowly. Show my captain the proper respect and be glad Robin's not here. Last time someone told Luffy to show respect to his betters around her, she broke half the bones in his body, including his spine and neck. Sanji said, his eyes dark as he glared at his former brother darkly. Zoro was really mad at her for that. He wanted to slice that guy up to, what he say, send a message or something like that. Luffy asked, smiling unbothered up at Sanji, who nodded and ruffled Luffy's hair. That was one of the few times I agreed with the shitty Murimo. No one says that kind of thing to our captain and gets away with it, Sanji said, looking furious at the reminder of that guy. What did he say? Bruy asked, curious and wary. Luffy's response proved just how innocent he was despite being a big-shot pirate captain. He said, I'd look good on my knees, but I don't get why. I tried asking Robin and Nami why they were so mad at him for saying I looked good, but they told me to not worry about it and just let them know if anyone else ever says something like that to me. Mama, can I stay with Luffy and his crew for a while? Ammon finally asked after a minute of tense silence amongst the group after what the clueless captain had just said. Your duties as a minister? Big Mom immediately questioned. Pure has shown interest in being a minister recently, and her combat skills have greatly improved since last time. Best way for her to learn more now would be practical experience, and since Nuts Island is relatively peaceful but high in industry, it'll be perfect for a beginner. There are also several assistants that'll be present to keep her from doing anything that will cause too much of a fallout, Ammon said without hesitation as she recalled the almost shark-mouthed girl, Galette's twin sister actually. And with you traveling with your brother, you can judge how strong his crew is yourself and either remove the weak links or train them while showing that he's one of us, Big Mom said, earning a cold smirk from Ammon, who was looking forward to checking the strength of her brother's crew, especially the swordsman. He's a Charlotte? Yanji asked, paling slightly as he thought about that, earning nods from the others and causing the 2 young Charlotte women to give him predatory smiles for what he had said about their brother. Charlotte Monkey D. Luffy, one of my little brothers. Stolen from his crib the day he was born and raised away from us, but he's back where he belongs now, Bruy said, wrapping an arm around her brother with a grin and earning a grin from Luffy, who snuggled close to her. Ama's joining my crew? Luffy asked with bright eyes as he looked at the swordswoman, who merely looked at her mother. Fine, you can babysit your brother, but if I call you home? Big Mom trailed off, making Ammon nod slightly while Luffy lunged forward and wrapped her up in a hug with a wide grin on his face. Yeah, is Twig coming too? Luffy asked, grinning brightly as Ammon adjusted her stance a bit so that his weight didn't knock her to the floor. My name is Bruy, brat. No, son. Bruy is the first line of defense and recon for the family. Her duties are a lot more encompassing than Ammon's are, Big Mom said, making Luffy pout for a second before he was distracted when Ammon licked his cheek again, causing him to giggle as he tried to lick her back, which made her laugh. You've laughed more since he's been back than you have in years, Amani. Bruy said, smiling at seeing her older sister so happy for once. The woman always seemed so sad or melancholic, but with Luffy around she smiled and laughed. Luffy has that effect on people, Sanji said with a smirk as he lit another cigarette. HMPH, so the disgrace wants to work under a no-name pirate? Yanji asked, sneering slightly and making Sanji glare sharply at him. Oi oi, don't you know who that no-name is? I literally just said it a minute ago, Sanji asked, flicking his nearly whole cigarette into his so-called brother's face. He's the future pirate king. Show some respect, Sanji said, his voice dark now as he stared down the green-haired Vinsmoke. Why don't you make me? Yanji asked, moving as if to attack Sanji, only to be sent crashing into the far wall by one of Luffy's fists. As the rubber boy jumped down from where he had been wrapped around his sister. Is he really your brother, Sanji? He's really weak, Luffy asked, pulling a face at Sanji, who grinned slightly at that around a new cigarette. Nah, he's not my brother, Captain. Just some random punk who looks like me, Sanji said, ruffling Luffy's hair a bit and earning a bright smile from the boy while Yanji emerged from the wall with a scowl on his face. You're so weak it's boring, Luffy whined at the green-haired Vinsmoke, who snarled and moved forward as if to attack again. A flaming foot from Sanji knocked him back into the wall before he could actually hit the rubber-brained straw hat-wearing boy. See, he's so easy to knock away. It's like swatting flies, and I don't mean those big ones back on Little Garden, Luffy said to his cook, who merely blew some smoke from his mouth. Those were kind of fun to fight. I wonder how they would have tasted when you grill them, Sanji wondered, while Luffy's eyes went wide at that and his grin seemed ready to break his face. I want to find out. As soon as we get everyone back together again, let's go back to Little Garden and do it. We can see how Dory and Brogy are doing too, Luffy said, his eyes turning into near stars at the idea. Shall I tell Nami Swan to start making a map out of the new world and back to paradise for the trip? Sanji asked, making Luffy pause and tilt his head. Nah, we're really close now. I can feel it. So let's wait a while longer and then we can go around the world again, visiting all the islands and blues, Luffy said, his eyes bright and earning a fond smile from his cook. You got it, Sanji said, nodding along and making Luffy beam up at him brighter. We'd have to anyway since Nami wants to chart everything, Luffy said, shrugging slightly and making Sanji pause before nodding. True. Now come on, Captain. Let's leave your mom to talk with the visiting royals and let's go see where the others are. Yeah, Sanji asked, smiling down at his captain, who nodded and bounded over to the door with a grin on his face. Don't go wandering off by yourself, brat. You'll get lost in a heartbeat, Bruy called after her brother as she moved to chase him down. Come on, Twig. You come with then, Luffy said, grabbing his sister's hand and pulling her along without pausing. Ammon snorted at her sister's shout. Bruy could get riled up so easily, and boy did she have their mother's lungs. How many times do I have to tell you that my name's Bruy? Who are they? Luffy asked curiously as his sister brought him up to the top of the shadow where the party to welcome back Luffy was. Not that he knew it was for him. These are some of Mama's underworld contacts. There's Stussy, the queen of the Pleasure District, the lone shark king god of fortune Dufeld, Major Undertaker Drug Pelko, the president of the World Economic Journal Big News Morgans, the warehouse kingpin Gilberson the Hider, and last but not least the shipping king Deep Sea Currents Human. Mama invites them to most of her parties, Ammon said, introducing each of the underworld powers to her baby brother, who was riding on her back like a koala again until she pulled him off to make the introductions. Hi, Luffy said, grinning brightly at them all before his eye caught Morgan's. Hey Amma, are we going to eat him? Luffy asked innocently as he tilted his head at Morgan's. Ammon nearly choked on her cigarette in surprise before catching herself, while the underworld contacts looked just as surprised at the question. Why are you asking that? Ammon demanded, staring at her brother in disbelief. He's a chicken. Don't you cook and eat chicken? Luffy asked, earning a facepalm but smile from his sister, while the other underworld men were eyeing Morgan's, contemplating now. Stussy was just amused by it all as Morgan's let out a squawk of horror. No, Luffy, we're not going to cook Morgan's, unless he does something to make Mama mad. Then he's free game, Ammon said with a wicked smirk on her face, making Morgan's pale and squawk. I thought we were being invited to a wedding, Dufeld asked, looking at Ammon, who just smirked a bit wider. Why don't you go see what Smoothie can make for you to drink, Luffy? Ammon asked, making Luffy grin and bounce away to go find the female sweet commander. He still wanted to fight her in Katakuri since he already beat up Cracker the other day. It was fun, although he kept having to eat during the battle cause of his brother's ability. Is there any reason why the infamous Straw Hat Luffy is here and seems to be welcomed with open arms by the family? Stussy asked without wasting time as she watched Luffy shout something about a rocket and slam into the white-haired woman, who just laughed and used one large hand to mess with the boy's hair. Turns out he's one of my brothers. His father stole him right from the cradle the night he was born. We only recently got him back, Ammon said, making Giberson nearly choke on his drink. The supposed-to-be groom, Prince Sanji of the Germa, is Luffy's cook on his pirate crew. Thanks to that, we no longer need the alliance with the Germa. That and the way they treated him for being something more than an emotionless tool of his father doesn't sit well with most of us. They demean him because he's a cook who actually feels emotions. We consider cooking skills like his to be amazing and a blessing to be utilized. Ammon explained, nodding towards where the blonde-haired white-suited smoker was talking with several other people and pointedly staying far away from his one-time family. He's very cheerful for such a big-time pirate, Yumit said, watching as Luffy laughed while riding on Smoothie's shoulder, the woman being more amused than anything by the looks of it as she indulged her baby brother. Despite being a pirate and nearly 20 years old, he's still quite innocent, and both us and his crew wish to keep it that way. His crew seems to be very protective of him. Of course, that's something that we'll always encourage. We just got our brother back. We don't want to risk losing him again, Ammon said, her smile soft and fond as she watched her little brother leap from Smoothie's shoulder, nearly knocking the long leg off balance, and moved to tackle his cook, who sidestepped without even looking. Thankfully, it looked like Katakuri had moved to grab their flying brother before he could bowl over any of their guests. Laughing, Luffy dropped from Katakuri's arm and moved over to bounce around among everyone some more. He paused when someone from the shadier islands grabbed his arm and said something that Ammon couldn't hear, but it made Luffy look confused, which meant it could be almost anything. I feel like there's about to be a fight, Nami said from where she suddenly appeared beside Ammon, who had sensed her coming. Why do you say that? Ammon asked, quirking an eyebrow at the orange-haired thief whose eyes remained locked on her captain, who furrowed his brow confused as he talked back to the man. Because Luffy's involved. Between him and Zoro, something always results in a fight. And Brook enables them most of the time while Sanji joins in to one-up Zoro, Nami said, as if the answer was obvious. Luffy tilted his head before looking around, his eyes brightening up as he spotted Nami. Turning back to the man, Luffy said something before rocketing off towards Nami and Ammon, being caught by his sister easily. Most of the family had gotten used to Luffy nearly tackling them with his gum-gum rocket over the last week or so. Thanks, Amma. Nami, can you come translate for me? That guy's saying a bunch of things that don't make sense, Luffy said, smiling at his sister before whining at his navigator, who sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose. What did he say, Luffy? Nami asked without looking at her captain. He said something about it being a good thing that I'm rubber so I can stretch without pain, cause he and his friends wanted to show me a good time and were going to take turns with me. Something about paying me handsomely for my time, but I don't get what they would be paying me for, and you're the one who knows all about money and stuff, so I wanted to ask you, Luffy said with a bright smile, and it took all of 2 seconds for both Ammon and Nami to tense painfully as they processed what he had said and what the man meant. What? Nami's voice was arctic cold, and it sent a shiver down even the underworld leader's spines as her hand lowered from her face and her eyes glared lightning daggers at the man Luffy had been talking to. Yeah, he said that since I could stretch it meant I could take 2 or more at once, but wouldn't tell me what I was taking 2 or more. Luffy said with a nod. I see what they mean about him being innocent, Stussy said dryly as she stared at the pirate captain that looked very small compared to his older sister, who was holding him still. Don't worry about it, Captain. Let me take care of it, okay? Why don't you go find Chopper and see how he's doing with Brook? Nami asked, smiling pleasantly at her captain, who smiled brightly and nodded. Okay, maybe I can bug Katakuri into fighting me. Have fun, Luffy said, kissing his sister's cheek before dashing off again. In an instant, Nami had her baton in its smaller form out and was twirling it almost lazily. If you'll excuse me, I see someone who needs to be fried with lightning, Nami said, moving over towards the shady man who was staring after Luffy still. Ammon put out her cigarette and narrowed her eyes at the man who was soon to be mincemeat along with the group that was hanging around with him. Nami didn't bother hiding her cruel grin at Ammon's next words that were spoken low and dangerous. I believe I'll join you. Shuro is getting very thirsty all of a sudden, and I believe they need a reminder as to why I'm called Demon Lady. What is the meaning of this, Ammon? Big Mom demanded as Prospero finally caught his sister in some candy just before she could behead the man that had propositioned her baby brother. I'm protecting Lu Chan, Ammon said, unashamed of her actions as she tensed her muscles and easily broke free of the candy on her arms, although her legs were still bound. Luffy, explain, Big Mom said, her voice darkening as her face hardened. Explain what? Luffy asked, popping up on Smoothie's shoulder as the female sweet commander walked over to see what was going on. It wasn't every day that Ammon made a scene at one of their mother's parties after all, much less be in such a rage that it took Prospero, Deifuku, and Compote to hold her down for more than a minute. Oh, it's that guy that was saying weird stuff. Did you find out what he meant, Nami? Luffy asked, seeing his navigator being picked up in one of Oven's hands with her baton held in his other. Yes, I did. Me and Amundsen were taking care of it, Luffy, but you should tell the others what he said, Nami said, looking up at her captain, who blinked for a second. About him saying that since I'm rubber I can take 2 or more easily and that he would pay me handsomely for my time, Luffy asked, making his mom and siblings pause for a moment as their eyes focused on the man that Ammon had been about to kill. He was missing a few fingers from when Amon nearly dissected him across the waist, but he had clumsily dodged most of it. His friends had been struck with some small blasts of lightning, and one was blown off of the roof by a small hurricane before Nami's climate act was taken from her. Tell him the rest, Amon hissed out, her eyes a golden color with a reptilian slit to them. About how he and his friends wanted to show me a good time and take turns with me. Luffy asked, looking confused and making all of his siblings still. Is that so? You were thinking about him in such a way? Smoothie asked, her voice deliberately light as she stared at the man who was trying to staunch the bleeding of his stumps. Smoothie was towering over him now as she absorbed some of the liquid in the air without meaning to. Kid's cute and will make a killing on the streets, especially with his stretching ability, the man said, obviously not realizing the position he was in as he tried to stop the bleeding. Luffy, why don't we go sit and eat some cake together? Leave Smoothie and the others to deal with this man and his offer, Big Mom asked, looking at her son who leapt over towards her and was caught effortlessly in one hand. Okay, I still don't get what I'd take 2 or more of or why he likes my rubber powers so much, so it's a mystery. Food, Luffy said with a grin as he was cradled in his mother's palm like an injured bird. That's right, it's a mystery and the others will deal with it while we go eat, Big Mom said, smiling fondly down at the small boy who grinned up at her. Take care of the trash, Big Mom ordered her older kids, who all gave vicious or bloodthirsty smiles at this as they surrounded the man and his friend. What's so important about that brat? So what, he has a good-sized bounty? I don't see why you all care so much. A man who first propositioned Luffy said, looking a bit confused and shocked by how most of the older Charlottes were surrounding him and each seemed to be pissed. That boy you propositioned? Oven asked as he cracked his knuckles, letting Nami go and handing her back her climate act before his fists began to heat up. That's our baby brother, Smoothie said, looming over him, and you could see that he understood his situation by just how pale he went. That or the oh shit expression on his face. Wow, they really don't like him, huh? Luffy asked, looking innocently confused as he enjoyed a piece of ham that his mother handed him, her letting him sit in the brim of her hat as they ate together. Mama, no they do not. Don't worry yourself over it, however, Big Mom said with a laugh as she glanced up at her son before focusing on the pastry in her hand. Okay, Luffy agreed with a shrug as he finished off the meat quickly, finishing off the rest of the food that she had placed up there on a plate for him in record time. Luffy gave a small yawn at the slight swaying motion of the hat and the sounds of violence in the background, while somewhere to the far right Brook had strummed up a song on his guitar. Curling up in the brim of his mother's hat, Luffy drifted off to take a nap since there was no threat to his nakama or family. He fell asleep, Mama, Napoleon tried to whisper to the Yonko, who glanced up slightly before smiling softly and a bit sad. She didn't remember the last time one of her children felt safe enough around her to fall asleep near her, much less were small enough and felt safe enough to sleep in her hat. Let him rest. Bruy, Amand, and Smoothie say he has nightmares a lot, Big Mom whispered back to her hat, who gave an agreeing hum that sent vibrations through Luffy's body a lot like a purr. The only reason that those three knew was because Bruy was a mild insomniac who checked on her siblings through the mirrors when she couldn't sleep. Bruy had alerted Amand to the nightmares and how Luffy wouldn't be able to sleep on his own again after one. Amand had immediately gone to her little brother and curled around him, declaring a small sleepover which Bruy had fetched Smoothie for. The three of them were the favorite 3 sisters of their siblings for a reason, and helping their siblings sleep again after a nightmare was only one of the reasons why. All taken care of, Mama, Smoothie said, approaching her mother and looking around confused as to where her brother went while Amand was cleaning the blood off of her word. Her brother's staying a good distance from her, looking green. SHH, try to keep a bit quieter. Your brother fell asleep in Napoleon's brim, Big Mom said, waving for her children to quiet down a bit and making each of them glance up at the hat, surprised. Last time that happened was when Bruy was little, Oven said, surprised even though he still looked a little green. Why do you boys look so green? Big Mom asked, looking at her sons confused and hoping they weren't getting sick at one of her parties. Then again, they weren't used to healthy food quite yet, so maybe it was making them sick until they were used to it. I reminded everyone of why the Marines labeled me Demon Lady to begin with. The unofficial reason, at least, Amand said with a smirk on her face. You neutered them? Big Mom asked, staring at her daughter, who finished wiping the last speck of blood off of her famous sword. They were thinking of one of my innocent little siblings in such a manner. I merely removed the head they were thinking with, using the flat of the blade, Amand said, making all the males wince and turn greener at that. Really? Big Mom asked, looking at Amand, who nodded as she sheathed her sword finally. Amand looked surprised, embarrassed, and pleased all at once as Big Mom reached one hand out and gently patted her head, using one finger to stroke her hair proudly. That's my girl. Now everyone, I am sure you are wondering what the important announcement was that I had to make today, Big Mom announced loudly after the feast was over, having been informed of Luffy waking up by Napoleon. What's going on? Luffy asked groggily from the hat. Luffy, you need to tell everyone hi, Big Mom said, smiling slightly as she looked up towards her hat, causing everyone else to do the same. "Mornin'," Luffy said, rubbing one eyelid sleepily with the back of his hand as his head popped up to look at everyone over the brim of the hat. Everyone stared for a moment at the small boy with the sleepy smile and the straw hat hanging around his neck by a cord. "It's afternoon, little brother," Ammon said, her eyebrow twitching a bit as she eyed everyone around her. More than a few people were staring at her baby brother with blushes on their faces at how adorable he looked. "Sorry, must have fell asleep," Luffy said, yawning slightly and causing a few of his sisters to coo over how cute he looked when he was sleepy. "It's all right. Napoleon is used to be used as both a crib and a bed, although it has been quite some time since anyone was comfortable or small enough to sleep in him," Big Mom said, smiling gently as Luffy yawned again before shaking his head as if to shake off the sleepiness. "He's so cute. Who is he?" one woman from Fruit Island asked with a squeal as she stared at Luffy, who was moving as if to jump from his mother's hat. "That was a great nap," Luffy said, stretching his arms behind his head a bit as he grinned from his new spot on his mother's knee. "I'm proud to introduce you all to someone who is sweet commander level," Big Mom announced, earning whispers and mutters from the partygoers who were certainly staring at Luffy with a lot more fear and respect now. "My missing son has returned home. This is Charlotte Monkey D. Luffy, also known as Straw Hat Luffy," Big Mom announced, and there was pure silence for a moment before the non-family members began shouting questions and comments about this news loudly. "Quiet down," Big Mom said, causing most to calm down immediately. The ones that didn't, a light blast of haki had them taken care of. "Cool, you have Conqueror's haki too?" Luffy asked, grinning brightly up at his mother, who paused and stared at him. "You have it?" Big Mom asked, making Luffy nod happily. That news raised him even higher in his family and the others' eyes. Despite their mother having a strong haki of kings, not many of her children had it. Katakuri was the most well-known, but only 5 others had revealed their own ability to the others, and those were mostly among the older members of the family like Prospero and Compote. None of the ones as young as Luffy had unlocked the skill or shown that they have it, or if they have, then they're keeping quiet about it. "HMPH, I doubt if it's as strong as Katakuri Nai-chan," Flam said, crossing her arms and glaring at the stretchy boy who merely looked over to his big brother. "You have it too?" Luffy asked, grinning widely and earning a nod from the red-haired man. "Now I really want to fight you. Come on, let's fight," Luffy said, beaming brightly as he jumped over and tried to hug Katakuri. The older man merely stepping to the side and watching amused as Luffy sailed right into Compote, who caught him without even thinking about it. "Are you going to stop picking fights?" Compote asked, looking down at her baby brother amused and earning a wide grin. "Nope, he's really strong, right?" Luffy asked with a tilt of the head. "The second strongest in the family, just behind Mama." Compote agreed with a nod of her head. "Then if I fight him and beat him up, that means I'll get stronger too. That way I can protect everyone better. I gotta be the strongest so that I don't lose anyone." Luffy said, his face a smile but his eyes dead serious. The older siblings all paused for a second and exchanged looks over Luffy's head as they registered what he meant. "So you want to be able to protect everyone so you don't lose another sibling?" Prospero asked, staring at Luffy, who seemed content to stay in Compote's arm. His oldest sister was comfy and kind of squishy like a pillow. "Or my nakama and friends." Luffy agreed with a nod of his head, causing his older siblings to look at each other, and a few shrugged while others smiled slightly. It was rare for the ones younger than Smoothie to actually care about protecting their family instead of just themselves. "I'll fight with you later, but be warned, I'm not very good at holding back," Katakuri said, staring down at Luffy, who grinned widely up at him. "That just means I get to use my secret technique," Luffy said with a bright grin on his face that was a bit savage. "Secret technique? You have a secret technique and you didn't use it against me and Amand?" Prospero asked, staring at Luffy, whose savage grin was even more savage as he nodded his head. "Yep, I'm not allowed to use it a lot, but it's not dangerous to me. Sabo Nyai and Gramps and Makino and Daten and Ace Nyai all made me promise not to use it unless I was in a really serious fight against someone lots stronger than me. I didn't know how strong you two were, so I wanted to check before using it. But I didn't need to, and everyone says that Kata Nyai is stronger than the rest of you, so I gotta use it against him," Luffy said with a nod of his head as if it made absolutely perfect sense, and the sad thing was it kind of did. "Wait, you've had a secret technique this whole time and you've never used it?" Nami demanded as she stared up at her captain, who nodded his head. "Yep, I didn't have time to use it against Kuma or at Marineford, but I didn't need it for the rest of the fights," Luffy said with a bright smile on his face as his crew present twitched a bit but didn't say anything. He must have had a good reason, right? Then again, this was Luffy they were talking about. "I'll fight you, but we have to fight in the mirror world or somewhere where there won't be any homies or anyone else who might get caught up in the fight." Katakuri agreed finally as he stared at his brother, curious as to what the secret technique was since his haki hadn't warned him of anything just yet. "I'll take you both there in a little while, but try not to destroy too many mirrors," Bruy said, sighing, although she was looking forward to the fight. Luffy had been able to defeat Cracker, Prospero, and Amand, all 3 so far. And while she would always proclaim that Katakuri was the strongest and most perfect older brother ever, she was quite curious to see how Luffy would match up against him. Perhaps she'd have a category for strongest older brother and a category for strongest younger brother. After all, Luffy was a lot better than most of her younger brothers. Hey, which technique should I use for the fight? Luffy asked, blinking curious and eager eyes up at his siblings and mom as he prepared to fight with Katakuri. Bruy about to take them into the mirror world so that they could fight without breaking anything, although she was going to set it up so that everyone could see what was going on via use of a large mirror she was using most of her energy to create at the moment. You have more than one? Nami asked with a twitch of her eyebrow, causing Capote to immediately pull the orange-haired girl away from Luffy. They had learned that when she began twitching, Nami tended to hit Luffy, and while he did seem to deserve it sometimes, none of them would react well if she hit him now. I got 3. See? Luffy asked, smiling brightly as he held up 3 innocent-looking brown bags, each one marked with a colorful number. The first one had a golden number 1 on it, the second one had a pink number 2, and the third one was an explosion of colors making up the number 3. I'm quite curious to see what all of them do, to be honest, Smoothie said, eyeing the rather innocent little bags curiously. But I can't use all 3 at once. Well, I could actually, but using any combination of the techniques tends to break people according to Gramps, Luffy said, frowning up at Smoothie, who looked even more curious now. Well then, how about you take turns using each technique? You can use number 3 on Katakuri-chan. And if Smoothie's alright with it, she'll be your opponent for technique number 2, and then for number 1 you can fight me and Oven and Deifuku all at the same time, okay? Capote asked, earning nods from those she named, while Luffy's eyes and grin widened until his family was worried that it would break his face. And if you manage to win all 3 fights, then you can use a combo of all 3 techniques to fight against me. I want to see just how strong you are, son. But I want it to be a surprise, so I won't be watching your fights with the others, okay? Big Mom asked, grinning at Luffy, whose eyes widened and sparkled at this. The boy honestly seemed to have sparkles and flowers and butterflies around him at the moment, which was really screwing with everyone. Alright, watch out, Katakuri. I'm going to win for sure. Luffy cheered as he put the other 2 bags away from somewhere and then opened the third one. Katakuri just smiled with his eyes and patted his brother on the head before entering the mirror. More than a few of the other siblings scoffed at his arrogance for claiming he could defeat the strongest of the siblings. Big Mom just laughed before pointedly going to the farthest table where Mother Caramel's picture was set up and enjoying her cakes and sweats. She pointedly sat with her back to the mirror so that she couldn't see whatever trick her son was about to pull out of the bag. Luffy grinned eagerly as he approached the mirror, earning a small ruffle of the hair from Bruy before he seemed to realize something. Oh yeah, Luffy then did something his family hadn't seen him do since he arrived. He took off his straw hat. I don't want to risk messing it up or losing it in the mirror world. Sanji, hold this for me, Luffy said, racing over to his cook and putting the hat on top of his head, causing the assembled Vinsmokes besides Ryuju to sneer or look on dispassionately, while Sanji merely smiled fondly. It's safe with me. Go get him, Captain, Sanji said, running his fingers through Luffy's messy hair briefly before the boy grinned and dashed to the mirror. Might want to go ahead and use that secret technique now, little brother. Katakuri is the strongest of any of us after all, Bruy warned Luffy, who grinned wider and walked through the mirror. Any bets on who wins? Brownie asked, glancing at his siblings. 5,000 on Katakuri Nai-chan, of course. Flamb was the first to pipe up, causing a few to nod in agreement. While we know Katakuri's abilities better than we do Luffy's, we can't forget all that Luffy managed to accomplish without any of us helping or training him. Katakuri received training from Piro's Nai and Capote and even Mama ever since he and Oven Nai and Dai were small, up until he was about 10 when he started training on his own. Even then he had help from some of the rest of us and Mama. Luffy never received that help since he was stolen from us, and yet he managed to accomplish many impressive feats. This may actually be the toughest fight that Katakuri's had in a long time against someone not a sweet commander or veteran of the family, Smoothie said, humming as she thought about it. They knew almost nothing about most of their younger brother's skills and abilities with his fruit powers. I'll place 10,000 on Luffy, Nami said, her voice serious, and making most of the siblings that spent time with the Straw Hats these last few days to look at her surprise. They knew how much she liked her money and how stingy she was. Luffy never loses. Not when he's serious about something, and since he took his hat off to keep it from getting damaged, he's very serious about this fight. Luffy will win, Nami said as if it were pure fact, earning nods from Sanji and Chopper while Brook merely began playing a suspenseful melody on his guitar. I'll bet 20,000 on Luffy. We shouldn't underestimate our baby brother, Amin agreed with Nami, having spent more time with the girl than most of the other siblings assembled. It was a good idea to get to know the crew she was temporarily joining before they set sail for Wano after all. Nami would never risk her money on a fool's bet. She probably knew something that they didn't, and she wasn't sharing what that was. Your loss, 15,000 on Katakuri. Brownie said with a shrug as everyone looked to Compote, who was writing the information and bets down so that everything was nice and neat for later when a few would likely refuse to give up their money. That was a great warm-up. Time for my technique now, Luffy said with a laugh as they all looked back to the mirror only to see that the two had been exchanging light attacks to test each other while they had all been making bets and talking. Luffy had a few bruises and bumps while Katakuri remained untouched. Is this a joke? Katakuri demanded when he saw something in the future that did not seem to please him. Let's get this started, Luffy said with a laugh as he withdrew 3 things, 2 cans and a bag, from the brown bag he was still holding for some weird reason. He isn't serious, is he? Prospero asked in disbelief when he got a good look at the items. Oh, this is going to be a slaughter. Flambe was laughing cruelly at how sure she was of her big brother winning. He has to be playing a prank, right? Oven asked, sweat dropping. How the hell did he get a hold of those things? We keep him far away from them in every town since Alabasta. Nami demanded, her eyes wide and her features drastically paling when she saw what was in Luffy's hands as he popped the tops on the cans and opened the smaller bag. Amon and the other Charlotte siblings watched as Luffy chugged 2 cans of Monster energy drinks, and then ate a whole bag of pure sugar and chocolate. The resulting chaos happened so fast that Katakuri's observation haki couldn't keep up and he was completely blindsided, as was everyone else. It was also the fastest fight in TotoLand history, especially against a sweet commander. All of the siblings made sure to keep caffeine and sugar and energy drinks very far from Luffy after that brief 2-second-long battle. Flambe had been right when she said it'd be a slaughter, it just wasn't in Katakuri's favor. Smoothie was now warily eyeing the pouch that Luffy was going to use for his battle with her. It had taken a few hours and a good punch to the head from Nami for the effects of his third technique to wear off to a suitable level that anyone could keep up with the hyper little rubber captain. Although it was kind of fun seeing the look on Mama's face when Luffy began bouncing around everywhere. But he was too cheerful for anyone to be mad at him, really. He kept the party interesting and going for several hours, however. It's not another energy drink, is it? Cause I am banning those from my ship and the island I govern from now on. Smoothie asked, eyeing the bag as Luffy beamed up at her, bouncing in place a little still as he prepared for his second fight while Katakuri was being fussed over by several of his siblings with medic training and Chopper, who wasn't bothered in the least by the torn mouth that he had glimpsed beneath the scar. Nope, can't repeat it twice or else I wouldn't have numbered them, Luffy said as if it were completely obvious, which it might as well should have been. After all, why have them labeled as different techniques if it was just the same thing only in a different bag? Makes sense, Smoothie allowed as she gripped her sword, preparing to fight her brother now in the mirror world after Katakuri had been quite easily lifted up and pulled out by Luffy. Honestly, the immense show of strength from the small rubber boy had most of his younger siblings staring at him with starry eyes while his older ones that weren't considered veterans were gaping in disbelief. Any bets on what this technique will be? Moscato asked, looking to his siblings and the Straw Hat crew nearby, who all shrugged. This is the first we've ever seen or heard about these techniques. We're just as wary and confused as you are, Chopper said after he finished bandaging the last of the wounds that Katakuri had received before he could turn to Machai. Any bets on who will win? Brownie called with a grin on his face despite having lost money on his last bet, although Amon and Nami both were quite smug and happy with the small fortune they had accumulated with such a quick and rather easy bet. Luffy, 15,000, Nami said with bully in her eyes, making Amon smirk a bit. Luffy for 40,000. Amon said. After all, Nami wasn't wrong last time, which would have been understandable considering Katakuri's bounty and own abilities against those of the Straw Hat Captain. Smoothie, while being just as, if not more so, dangerous as Katakuri in her own way, still wasn't quite up to the strength of their elder brother. She was less likely to succeed in this fight, but she would be more cautious now after seeing what the third technique had done. Smoothie for 20, Citron said, scoffing and deciding that it was a safer bet with the white-haired woman. Smoothie for 20, Cinnamon agreed. The triplet long legs had to stand together and support each other after all. So of course she'd bet on the oldest of the triplets, even if it was only by minutes. Your loss, Nami said with a grin while Compote sighed as she wrote down the bets again in her black book. There had been a near riot after the results of the hyper fight over how it should be disqualified due to the outside items. Prospero had shut that down immediately when he began dripping candy and had remarked that all of them knew that Luffy would be using a secret technique and that the bet held true. Whoa, that was close, Luffy said, having ducked under the swing of his sister's sword. She wasn't a swordswoman like Amon, nor was her sword named or famous ... but Smoothie's weight and strength behind her swings and her slightly personalized way of swinging it did make her very dangerous with the sword, especially when she added some of the juice from her powers to the swing. Better be quick, little brother, Smoothie said with a smirk as she advanced on the short captain, who dug around in the bag even as he evaded her swings. Got it. Luffy pulled out the items and quickly but expertly put them on, causing some of his siblings to facepalm and the others to sweat drop or just gape at the sight of the items. Are those ... cat ears? Hammond asked, amused as she saw what Luffy was putting onto his head. Okay, I got the gear on ... Now for the kicker, Luffy said with a grin, and it disturbed his brothers just how fucking cute Luffy looked with a pair of black and red cat ears on his head, a cat tail somehow hanging from his pants, and a pair of black and red cat paws on his hands. More than a few of the females watching were squealing at the sight, and Smoothie even paused for a second and emitted some kind of strangled squeaking sound as she tried not to squeal as well. That's when Luffy cranked it up a bit by using his rubber powers. Ni-chan. Luffy's eyes widened into a puppy pout, or rather sad kitty eyes at the moment, as he stared up at Smoothie, who stood frozen as Luffy pretended to paw at her playfully with a tilt of his head. Oh god, he's way too cute for this to not work, especially on Smoothie, Ammon said, more amused than anything, even as she tried not to squeal, eyeing the men from the islands nearby that were blushing or having nosebleeds as they saw her little brother with the cat ears on. Are you mad at me, Ni-chan? Luffy asked, and his voice began to waver, much to several of his siblings' horror, as Smoothie began to tremble slightly. She knew she should be fighting him. She knew this was one of his techniques ... But damn it, he was too fucking cute. Smoothie loved cute things, and her family to bits. Now one of her precious baby brothers was the most adorable thing she had ever seen, and staring up at her with those wide eyes, and he looked so sad. Ni-chan. Luffy's eyes began to water as his lips wobbled, causing Smoothie's sword to fall from her hand as she rushed forward to soothe her baby brother, who was just too adorable, and oh god, please don't let him cry because of her. He was just too cute for words. I'm not mad at you, little Lou. I promise. Ni-chan's not mad. How about I get you some milk or some food? Do you want a sword? Maybe a ship? I can get you one if that would make you happy, Smoothie said, nearly frantic as she tried to keep her cat-styled brother from crying as she cradled him in one arm much like one would a baby. I just want to play with Ni-chan and maybe eat, Luffy said, pawing at her pitifully and making her nod her head. Sure, we can play. Should I go find a cat toy? Bruy has some, I know. She's a crazy old cat lady and she has plenty of toys, and she won't mind if I borrow one to make you smile and play. Oh, and food. Mama has plenty of food set up for everyone to enjoy for the party, and we can find you some meat. That's your favorite, right? Even if the cooks didn't make any, I'm sure your cook can have some ready soon. Just please don't cry, little Lou. Smoothie was nearly frantic as she tried to do everything in her power to make her brother happy again. Everyone stared for a moment as Smoothie fretted and panicked over her baby brother before Nami said something that had Ammon half choking on her cigarette and half cackling. Well, it looks like she has a brother complex forming. This counts as Luffy's win, so pay up, people. You have taken out all three of my sweet commanders. Don't fight him, Compote, Oven, Deifuku. I think it's time to see just how well my missing young one stacks up against his mother, Big Mom said, standing once Luffy had finally removed his cat paraphernalia and got free from his sisters, who were fretting and smothering him in affection. Okay, Luffy said brightly with a grin as he reached for the first pouch. You will have to use 2 of them against me, son. And we don't need you bouncing around again. Use the first and second technique on me and see if you stand a chance. Big Mom challenged her son, who stared at her shocked for a second before grinning widely. Huh, he's against Mama now. I bet 10,000 on Mama, Brownie said, trying to win back the money he lost so far against the 2 women who looked at each other. I bet 50,000 on Luffy, Nami announced loudly, earning gaping mouths and wide eyes from all of her crewmates except for Luffy. 1, Luff, Ammon said, smirking as she lit a cigarette. 1,000, Flambe asked, frowning. That was Ammon's lowest bet yet. 1,000,000, Ammon said, blowing out a perfect smoke ring as her siblings looked shocked for the high bet. Even as Compote wrote it down. Fine, I'll take that bet, Deifuku said, glaring at his sister for thinking the rookie would beat their mother. Okay, secret combo technique, Luffy said happily before his mother suddenly had a dark aura around her as she activated her powers and leaned down to stare him straight in the eye. Stay or life, Big Mom demanded, her voice deadly. She's using that on him already. She's bringing out the big guns, Prospero noted, although he looked worried for Luffy. Despite taking out Katakuri and pretty much tricking Smoothie into surrendering, Mama was on a completely different, higher level. Most of their siblings rushed to place bets on their mother right then, hoping for some quick and easy money. Ammon didn't look the least bit bothered and instead just seemed amused at their antics. Life, Luffy said, grinning up at Big Mom, who moved as if to take his lifespan but paused when it didn't appear. Huh, stay, or life, Big Mom demanded again as she exerted some of her king's haki. Life, didn't you hear me? Luffy asked with a small laugh while his siblings' eyes slowly began to widen when nothing happened. Stay, or life, Big Mom demanded for the 3rd time as she extended all of her haki that she dared use on her tiny rubber son. Geez, why are you repeating yourself? Do I need to say it louder, Mama? Life, Luff asked, frowning and shouting the last word back at his mother, who looked completely dumbfounded as she stared down at her son, her aura and powers dispersing in an instant. He's not the least bit afraid of Mama, Prospero asked, his voice a soft, shocked whisper as he stared shocked at his little brother who barely stood taller than their mother's foot. "You, if you had even a tiny trace of fear of me, then I should be able to take your soul ... but ... you ... you're not scared of me in the slightest." Big Mom could barely choke the words out as she stared down at Luffy wide-eyed. Everyone was scared of her to some degree, even and especially her children. This was the first time her powers didn't work on someone, especially someone so small and young. "Why would I be?" Luffy tilted his head, honestly confused, even as he began pulling out his cat items and putting them on. Holy shit. It said something about how much everyone agreed with those words when not a single person so much as glanced at Compote, shocked for them. "You're not as scary as Gigi. His fist of love hurts even though I'm rubber, and he's always really mean when he came to visit. He threw me into that ravine and it took me almost 3 days to find my way out." Luffy whined slightly as he said that, making his siblings look at him confused or curious. A ravine. Big Mom was just as surprised at that. Yeah, Makino was really mad at him for that, cause apparently kids weren't supposed to go 3 days without eating anything more than worms and dirt and bugs. "Don't see why though. I was 5, so I was already an adult," Luffy said casually, and making most of the guests and his siblings look horrified or sick to their stomachs at the thought. "I'm gonna kill that shitty old marine asshole," Sanji swore as his leg began to smoke, earning firm nods of agreement from his crewmates. "Here we go. Okay, forbidden combo technique. Killer cuteness." Luffy cheered as he seemed to suck in a large breath of air and then just blew it into something that was presumably in the brown sack. Everyone stared shocked, and quite a few jaws dropped open as Luffy grew smaller and smaller and smaller until he was toddler-sized and still wearing the cat ears and tail and paws, and oh my god, he looked so much cuter in that small form. "Mommy," Tiny Luffy said, his voice childish and high-pitched as he reached his arms up as if asking to be picked up. Oh my god, he's adorable. Even Nami and Ammon weren't immune as they squealed right alongside the other women. Stussy was full out cooing and slightly twitching. Apparently she wanted to go and hug the cute little baby-looking boy. "Mommy, mad at Lou?" Luffy asked, tilting his head up at his mother, who slowly sat on the ground shocked as she stared at the baby-sized version of her son in the cat ears and all that were too big on him, the boy nearly swimming in his now oversized red vest. "No baby, Mommy's not mad at you." Big Mom slowly reached out and almost hesitantly picked up her tiny son. He was so small. One wrong move of her fingers would have him as nothing more than a small smear on the ground. "Up, Mommy," Luffy cried, holding his arms up, and his smile looked even brighter and his eyes even wider as he was gently picked up in his mother's hand and brought to her face. "Mommy big. Lou wanna be big too," Luffy said as Big Mom slowly smiled so softly and maternally, a smile only her older children had any memories of seeing on her face before. "You'll grown up to be big and strong just like Mommy," Big Mom said hesitantly, almost fearfully, placing a gentle kiss to the top of Luffy's head and covering his entire head in the kiss. "Lou protect Mommy. Lou keep Mommy safe. Lou strong," Luffy said as he seemed to toddle closer to her, his tiny arms hugging her chin as much as he could without stretching. "You're very strong, baby. For now though, Mommy is going to protect her baby, cause that's what mommies do. You can protect Mommy when you're really strong and she's really old, okay baby?" Big Mom asked, nuzzling him gently and smiling brightly when he giggled as some of her hair tickled him, nearly toppling him over in her hand. "Do you ever recall seeing Mama act like this?" Flambe asked, shocked at how her mother was acting. "Only when we were very young. She didn't start getting more distant until after Bruy came along. She used to be like this with all of us," Oven said, his voice soft as he watched his mother gently, almost hesitantly play with and tickle baby-sized Luffy, who giggled as he played with her, acting the age he looked. "She's never going to want to let him go now, especially not if he stays that sized for a while," Compote noted with a soft smile. The last time she had seen her mother act like this was when Compote had introduced her to her first grandchild. Her mother had been so happy to have a grandchild to spoil. "Looks like this is Luffy's win again. Pay up, die Nai," Ammon said, looking at the genie wielder, who scowled darkly at her. "You can't be serious, you little..." Ammon cut her brother off by stepping closer to him so that he was reminded about the fact that she towered a good foot or two over him as she stared down at him, almost bored. "You forget, brother. Your little temper tantrums don't scare me," Ammon said, staring down her brother, who scowled. "Stop calling them that. I am not a child or baby." Daifuku snarled at her, making her raise one eyebrow unimpressed as she blew some smoke straight into his face. More than a few siblings nearby winced or hissed in sympathy at Ammon's next coldly stated words. "That had to hurt. Then stop acting like it and grow up. You're 49 years old and yet you act like a 4-year-old when things don't go exactly your way." It had been a little over a month since Luffy left Whole Cake Island to go and fight Kaido, much to his siblings' horror, not saying anything of his mother's. Ammon had called them on the snail and had told them all that while everyone was injured, all of Luffy's crew was alive and expected to be just fine, and that she had never been so exhausted before. Trying to follow her younger brother around to help protect him from any corruptive influences in her mind apparently wore her out more than playing with her younger siblings and nieces and nephews did. "Mama!" Smoothie yelled as she rushed into the throne room looking horrified with a newspaper clutched tightly in one hand and several siblings chasing after her. "Smoothie?" Big Mom asked, frowning and looking alarmed at her daughter's rather frantic actions as the white-haired sweet commander rushed straight up to her mother's throne instead of stopping a few feet away from it like they always did out of respect. "Mama, it's Luffy," Smoothie said, panting slightly since she had ran almost the length of the island. "Smoothie, I know you miss your brother and Amanda, but that does not mean you should rush in here like that. Ammon called just last week about how they were all finished up healing and getting ready to leave Wano." Big Mom said, relaxing a bit at that and giving her daughter a stern look for being so panicked about something like that. "No, Mama, that's not it. The paper." Smoothie nearly shoved the newspaper into her mother's hand. Looking at the headline, Big Mom nearly spat out her tea in shock at the headline blaring back at her. "STRAWHATLUFFY capture. Due to be executed. Smoothie, get everyone together and call our contacts. We're going to war. Monty Dore, try and get a hold of Amand or Luffy's crew and find out what happened." Big Mom began barking orders after a moment of shock as she stared at the newspaper headline. She had no idea the results of what the Marines were attempting to do would be felt all over the world, because they were far from the only ones who were planning to save the rubber-brained captain. At the Revolutionary Army headquarters, "What are we going to do? There's no way we're letting them execute my baby brother," Sabo said, flames licking at his skin as he resisted the urge to just rush off to try and save his brother without a plan. "Get everyone prepared for war. We leave as soon as everyone reports in." Dragon ordered, his face dark as his commanders and staff rushed to prepare everything for them to take on the entire Marine force if they had to, which they probably would have considering what all the Marines had dragged out for Ace 2 years ago. "Hang on, Lou. We're coming, baby brother," Sabo whispered as he clutched the picture of his baby brother unconscious, bad bloody after having been betrayed by one of the other supernova, and turned over to Blackbeard. "Killer better watch his back because he just made the shit list of everyone who cared about Lou. With members of the Grand Fleet of Luffy. We have to save Luffy senpai. Set sail immediately." That was Luffy's #1 fanboy, of course, and his loyal fanboying crewmates. "Poor Marines. We have to save him. We do owe him our lives. Let's go, men." Cavendish ordered his crew with a charming smile, causing them to cheer and set sail. "We're going to save Luffy land, aren't we, princesses?" Leo asked, looking at Viola and Rebecca, who exchanged looks. "Get the crews and ships ready," Viola ordered, earning nods from those that knew that Luffy had freed Dressrosa. "Let's go, men. Looks like the commander needs us," Hadrudin said, making his crew begin plotting and charting their path and next actions. "Looks like the boss needs a hand," Sai said with his normal grin as his crew began to plot the course for the next trip to go and save their commander. "Time to repay the boss," Idio said with a smirk, while Baby 5 looked happy to be useful to not just her husband but also to her husband's boss. "All right, men, let's show the Marines why you don't mess with the Straw Hat Grand Fleet," Orlumbus called, earning cries and shouts of agreement from his crew. "With the former Whitebeard pirates, Ace's little brother?" Marco asked, looking at the newspaper alarmed when some of his siblings brought it to his attention. "We made a promise to protect him, didn't we?" Aizo asked, looking eager for the upcoming fight in order to fulfill their obligation to the crew's semi-adopted baby brother. "Oyaji did tell us to back up Straw Hat with all of our strength," Vista murmured, earning a few nods from the others. "Call our allies that are still around. We're fulfilling Oyaji's request," Marco finally said after a moment, causing his siblings to look at him. "Do you mean?" Haruta trailed off, her eyes glinting slightly as she gripped her sword tightly. "We already went to war with the Marines once to save one brother. We won't fail this time. Prepare to storm the Marines," Marco ordered his siblings, who let out a cheer and raced off to get their family members together for the war to save their honorary brother. "Almost feel bad for the Marines. The Straw Hats aren't going to let this stand, and if they're anything like their captain," Aizo said, earning almost eager looks from his brothers. They couldn't wait to see what the crazy group of reckless pirates would do to those that dared take their beloved captain. With Shanks, "Let's go save Anchor." That seemed to be the only thing that they needed to hear before the savage grins lit up the older members' faces. "Wonder if Mihawk will join us," Ben mattered to himself. "With the Straw Hats and Amand." "What hit me?" Amand moaned as she began to came back around after something knocked her out from behind. She had gone to check on Luffy after making sure the rest of the crew were okay. Then she felt someone behind her, and before she could have her sword completely out of its sheath, everything went black. "Wait, her brother, Luffy." Amand bolted straight up, only now realizing that she was in a bed with her sword leaned against the bed and her hat on the table by her side. "Gone, and death is coming to those who took him," Zoro said with a growl to his voice. Amand was immediately on her feet, putting on her hat and grabbing her sword as she felt her animalistic side begin to take over. "Damn right. Hey, are you waking up now?" A soft voice asked Luffy, who was beginning to come around even though most of his body hurt. There was a nice gentle coldness around him though, which eased his aching bruises and muscles. Easy, don't move around too much. Those anklets are made of sea stone and you're pretty beat up, the soft voice said as Luffy began trying to push himself up, opening his eyes as much as he could with how much everything hurt. The first thing he noticed was soft light purple bluish hair hanging down towards him and brushing against his face gently. Then he noticed pale skin and worried light blue eyes that could drown a person. Pale, vaguely pinkish lips pulled up into a soft smile, and even the slight amount of dirt and blood on the woman couldn't distract from her obvious beauty. You're finally awake. I was getting worried about you, the woman said, making Luffy blink. He only barely noticed that his head was on her lap as she ran her hand through his hair. Where was his hat? Oh, yeah, he had put it on Carrot while he beat up Kaido. She had needed something to hold on to after Pedro's suicide attack. You're one of the ones from back at Marineford. You had gone to help save Ace, Luffy finally voiced, making the woman wince a bit in sympathy at how scratchy his voice was, which was probably not helped by the scratches and all on his throat. Yes, my name is Whitey Bay. They call me the Ice Witch. You're Ace's kid brother, Luffy, isn't it? Whitey asked, smiling slightly down at Luffy, who nodded his head and then looked around. Where are we and where's the others? Luffy asked, confused and worried for his crew as he noticed the familiar-looking cell. Impel down. What others? Whitey asked, glancing up to see if the guards were back yet. Thankfully they weren't. My crew and the Minks and Amani. We were all fighting Kaido and his crew and I beat him up, and Amani told me she was taking me to get patched up, but I think I fell asleep cause I don't remember anything after that, Luffy said, making Whitey's eyes shoot down to him in disbelief. You seriously beat Kaido, one of the 4 Yonko? Whitey asked, earning a nod from Luffy, which got her to utter a small curse under her breath in disbelief as she stared at the rubber boy whose beaten-up body seemed that much more impressive now. That explains why most of your wounds were already treated. You're the only one they brought in. The guards haven't said a thing about any of your crew except that they were beaten up badly. Now I know why, Whitey said, causing Luffy to look a bit relieved that his crew was alright as he tried to sit up. Don't move. You're still badly wounded and it's all I can do now to try and ease some of the pain with my ice, Whitey said, stopping him immediately when he went to take his head off of her lap. Okay, how did you get caught, Ice Lady? Luffy asked, blinking up at her and not bothered in the least by her telling him to stay right where he was. He usually had his head on Robin or Amen's lap when he took a nap on the sunny, but Whitey's lap was a bit colder and yet also more comfortable somehow. Her lap felt nice and comfy and he rather liked laying his head on it. Some upstart punk named Weeble or something like that took me by surprise when I was saving a little boy and his father from some Marines that were abusing their authority. He claimed to be Whitebeard's son looking for his treasure, but it's a bunch of seeking dung. Whitebeard was our pops. He didn't have any family aside from us, Whitey said, and Luffy could see the anger and sadness in her eyes. The anger at someone claiming to be her pop's son just for treasure, and the sadness that was still present at her pop's death. Looks like the guest of honor is awake, a guard said, startling Luffy and Whitey, who glared icily at the man. Has the show started yet? Another one called as several more guards rushed over looking eager and kind of evil. No, but it should soon, the first guard said, looking kind of lecherous as he eyed the 2 pirates in the cell. Don't mind us, Straw Hat. Just go ahead and have fun with the Ice Witch. Just because us Marines are above doing it doesn't mean we can't enjoy watching you do it, one Marine encouraged while Luffy sat up looking confused. Do what? Do you have any clue what they're talking about? Luffy asked, looking at Whitey, who had covered her chest with her arms, which caused Luffy to notice how torn her dress was. It was barely staying closed in some spots, which showed her flawless pale skin bruised and cut in some areas. Come on man, we did you a favor. We stuck you in a cell with a super hot babe and you're a pirate. You should be used to doing this, one of the Marines said, near drooling while Whitey scowled and had a bit of frost forming under her legs. Luffy's eyes narrowed a bit, remembering what his mother and oldest sister told him usually happened to female pirates or to females aught by bad pirates. Something inside of him twisted horribly when he noticed how the Marines were leering at what little bit of Whitey's body that they could see. He didn't want them seeing her body. He didn't want anyone looking at her body. Yeah, there he goes, one Marine cheered when Luffy took off his vest, causing Whitey to recoil away from him in horror and shock while tensing in preparation for a fight. Here, sorry if it's dirty. Kaido was really strong, Luffy said, smiling as he draped his vest around Whitey so that the back of his vest was resting on her front, hiding her generous assets from view and making her blink for a second. What? Whitey asked, her voice soft and confused as she stared at Luffy, who laid down with his head in her lap again without even aching. Your dress is torn and they can see your body. I don't know why, but I don't like the thought of anyone else seeing you like that, Luffy said with an innocent smile on his face, making Whitey blush a bit as she adjusted the vest to be more comfortable while he just closed his eyes ready for a nap. Come on man, don't be a pussy. Just bang hers. You know you want to. one Marine said, looking annoyed at Luffy's actions. I want to sleep, get something to eat, and get out of here. You want to do something to her? Come in here and try it yourself, but I'm warning you all. Here Luffy cracked one eye open to glare at them darkly with his hair shading half of his face. You'd have to kill me first. Luffy's voice was a dark near growl as he used a bit of haki to scare off the weak-willed whims. Thank you, but why? Whitey asked, staring down at Luffy, who smiled up at her brightly as the Marines ran off scared. Because you're a good person, I can tell, Luffy said, earning a surprised look from the woman who stared down at him. Besides, here Luffy leaned up and one hand gently grabbed her chin as he stared deep into her eyes, their faces less than an inch apart. She blushed slightly harder at his next words, but they made her smile, and there was a kind of warmth in her chest that she was unused to feeling. A sense of warmth and safety and belonging filled her body, leaving her confused and blushing but happy. I don't know why, but the thought of anyone else trying to touch you in such a manner just pisses me off. No one is allowed to touch you, so they're executing the both of us at the same time, huh? Well, at least we won't be alone, Luffy said with a brilliant smile as he looked up at Whitey from his now usual position of having his head in her lap while she played with his hair. Sometimes little snowflakes seemed to drift from her skin and stick in his hair as decoration. Luffy liked the snowflakes in his hair, but they had to be hidden or melted quickly anytime the Marines came near and checked on them. You don't really think your crew will let you be executed, do you? Whitey asked as she trailed her fingers through his hair, leaving bits of frost which turned some of the black hair a bluish color upon first glance. Nope, they're really protective of me, just like Sabo Niai. So is Ama ni ... and the rest of my sisters and some of my brothers too, actually, Luffy said, looking thoughtful at the end there. You have a lot of siblings? Whitey asked, making Luffy nod slightly. They were due to be executed tomorrow, and this was the first she had heard him mention his other siblings. Usually he talked about his crew or asked her about her dreams. Her only dream had been to become a successful female pirate like the Yonko Big Mom. He had looked a bit amused at that but didn't explain why. Yeah, on my mom's side. Turns out Dad took me from Mom when I was a baby. They found out, and most of my sisters and brothers are older than me, but they act like Sabo Nyai doesn't like Ace Nyai used to, Luffy said, smiling slightly as he thought about his siblings and his mother, although his smile was sad when he spoke about Ace. He really missed his brother. And like hell are we going to lose you so soon? The Marine that had just entered the cell to bring them their food said, causing the two pirates to look at him confused. He was one of the ones that normally avoided them at all costs unless he had at least 3 of his buddies with him. That's me, baby brother, the Marine asked as his face briefly changed into Bruly's, causing Luffy's eyes to widen as he grinned. He was ready to jump up and hug his sister, but she quickly motioned for him to be quiet, and for once ... he listened. Good to see you, Twigney, Luffy said, making Bruly give him a mock frown. You know good and well what my name is, brat, Bruly said, but her voice was fond, even though her eyes narrowed a bit when Luffy didn't look like he wanted to get off of Whitey, who was still wearing his vest. He had insisted on it so that none of the Marines could ogle her anymore, and she hated the way they had looked at her, and some had tried to cop a feel ... with Luffy here that stopped, and she didn't mind. She would never admit it, but she kind of liked the way he protected her from the other men and had let her wear his vest to preserve her modesty. I can't stay long before someone realizes that something is going on. I just came to make sure that you were all right and to make sure you knew that we aren't taking this lying down, Bruly said, looking at Luffy again and making him tilt his head at her a bit in the universal sign of curiosity or confusion. The Marines have no clue what they were signing up for when they took you and proclaimed to the world that they were going to execute you, and the Ice Witch too. We're bringing most of our forces to save you tomorrow, and we're going to obliterate the Marines, Bruly said, hissing the last bit with dark eyes. No one attacked their family and got away with it. They never have, and they sure as hell weren't going to start letting people get away with it now. Okay, just make sure no one dies trying to save me. It makes no sense to save me if it costs one of our other siblings' lives. That would just be stupid. I feel bad for Smokey, that Cage Lady, Kobe and Helmeppo, and that Fuji guy though. They're good guys, they just have a bad guy for a leader, Luffy said, frowning slightly at the end while Bruly noted down the description or name that he said. If they were truly some of the good Marines that didn't believe in the absolute justice crap, then they might be spared. But you could have told us about some of your friends that are coming to help save you, brat. Honestly, Mama almost had a heart attack at the amount of giants that are coming to save you, not to mention the Fishman Island force with their princess, Bruly said, sighing and giving her brother a look of mixed disbelief and exasperated fondness. Of course her reckless baby brother would have an entire fleet dedicated to him, which included pretty much all of Elphaba and their giant warriors. That wasn't even counting the ancient weapons that her brother's archaeologist had dug up to help save him. Oh, you met Craihoshi. That was seriously the only thing her brother asked her about the entire information she had just given him. You two ... just be prepared to be safe, Bruly said, closing her eyes and pinching the bridge of her nose before she turned back into the Marine man she had stolen the identity of and left the cell. Hey Whitey, Luffy asked a few minutes later as he and Whitey were eating, him letting her eat her fill first since she had been there longer. Whitey asked, smiling slightly as she fed Luffy a piece of pork that was on the plate. It looks like his sister had loaded up their trays with 3 times the normal amount of food they got. After we're rescued tomorrow. Luffy trailed off as he smiled when she fed him another piece of meat from the trays, his head still laying in her lap, which was his new favorite spot. Yes, Whitey encouraged him as she ate a piece of meat herself. Whitey felt the now normal warmth in her chest nearly pulse, and she smiled brightly but tried to hide it at Luffy's next words. Join my crew. Luffy's grin brightened up the entire prison just about at her murmured answer as she brushed one hand through his hair, her frost spreading across the messy ink-black locks. I'd be honored, Captain. It was time. Luffy and Whitey had both been escorted up to the execution platform with seastone cuffs around Luffy's wrists and 2 pairs around his feet, while Whitey had a pair of normal cuffs around her wrists. Originally, they were going to separate the two for the transfer and execution. But Luffy's near-feral snarl and the blast of his haki that knocked out most of the transport crew had the rest paling and agreeing to keep the 2 of them together. Why were they brought here together? Akainu demanded, glaring at his subordinates, who winced a bit at the anger in his tone. You want to kill her? You kill me first, and given what your Marines were wanting to watch be done to her, I'm not leaving her alone anywhere near you bastards. Luffy sneered at Akainu, his eyes full of hate as he glared at the man that killed Ace. TCH, not like it matters. In the name of absolute justice, you both will die today, Akainu said with a cruel smirk on his face. More like in the name of absolute bullshit revenge, Luffy muttered, making Whitey snort a bit and then try to hide her smile when Akainu glared darkly at them both. What was that? He asked dangerously, making Luffy blink up at him innocently. What was what? Luffy asked, pretending he didn't say anything, and Whitey sure as hell wasn't telling. Whitey sat down in the traditional pose of one waiting for their execution, sitting on her legs like she usually did in the cell. Luffy waited until she was sat down, then glanced at her, then at the chains on his wrists and feet, and then back at her with a grin on his face. Most of the Marines looked gobsmacked when Luffy flopped down onto the execution platform and made himself comfortable with his head on Whitey's lap. Whitey merely smiled down at him, although her cheeks were dusted a light shade of pink. It was one thing for him to rest with his head on her lap when they were in the cell alone. It was a completely different thing for him to have his head on her lap in front of the entire Marine force and probably the world, given the large transponder snails she had spotted on her way up the execution platform. Looks like none of the warlords are here, Luffy pointed out with a smile as he looked up at Whitey, who smiled fondly down at him but glanced up quickly and noticed that same thing. Against your crew of 8, we aren't going to need them, Akainu said with a snort, sneering slightly at the mention of the warlords. Whitey glanced at Luffy, who immediately grinned but tried to hide it unsuccessfully. What are you grinning about? Akainu asked, glaring down at Luffy. I got 9 people on my crew. You got the number wrong. Chishishi, Luffy said, snickering and earning a small snicker from Whitey as well, while Akainu growled at them like a rabid dog. 8, 9, doesn't matter. Against the entire force of the Marines, they stand no chance. Akainu scoffed at Luffy, who didn't say anything, merely snickered a bit to himself. Sir, ship spotted, one lookout cried, causing everyone to turn towards him. The Straw Hats, one of the Marines wearing a cape-like coat, asked, earning a rather startled shake of the head. No, it's the former Whitebeard Alliance, the lookout called, making Whitey's head snap up as her eyes narrowed, scouring the mist that had approached them for any sign of the ships that were so familiar. They must be here to save the Ice Witch, Akainu said, sneering and not looking bothered by this development. More ships incoming, another lookout called from the other side of the base. It's the Bardo Club and several others, and I don't believe it, but they've got the symbol for the Straw Hat Pirates on their sails, the lookout said, making Luffy glance up at the incoming ships as well with a grin on his face. Oh yeah, the Grand Fleet, Luffy said, nodding as if he had forgotten about that. And he probably had, despite his sister telling him they were coming just yesterday. Grand Fleet. There's a Straw Hat Grand Fleet now, Akainu asked with a scowl, wondering why they hadn't heard of this before. Ships from Dressrosa. The Kuja pirates are approaching as well. Does that mean we'll have one of the warlords on our side? It's the Revolutionary Army. How many? Akainu snapped out the question to the man who cried the warning about the army. It looks like all of them. The Red Force has been spotted. What, the Yonko Shanks is coming here too? I've spotted ships from Wano, including Minks and their ninja. It's the Heart Pirates. They're here too. What is with all these big-name pirates coming to fight? One of the vice admirals cried in disbelief, while Luffy and Whitey looked just as surprised as the others. The Supernova Kid has been spotted. Sir, you're not going to believe this, but it's the Alabaster Royal Army. Their princess is leading it. One lookout called out in shock, causing Luffy to look over surprised to see a familiar head of blue hair leading what looked like a warship, followed quickly by several much smaller and less impressive battleships, all flying the same flag. Vivi came too. Luffy seemed surprised by that while Whitey was gaping in disbelief at all the people who were here to rescue Luffy, because she knew that most of them sure as hell weren't here to save her. "She's, sir, that's the ancient weapon Pluton," one Marine cried out in horror at the ship that Vivi was standing on with a devilish grin on her face. To Luffy's surprise, his grandpa was on the ship too and barking orders at the ones manning it with a furious look on his face. "Sir, fishmen, an army of them," one of the lookouts cried, and more than a few people screamed when several enormous sea kings came out of the ocean with a roar. "It's the Fishman royal family. Hi, cry Hoshi," Luffy cried, trying his best to wave at the large mermaid princess who for once wasn't crying and instead she looked angry. "We were prepared for the revolutionaries and Whitebeard leftovers and even the Straw Hat's original crew." One of the vice admirals standing just under the platform muttered, looking shocked and a bit horrified at the forces that they were going to be facing. "Sir, the Straw Hat ship has been spotted," one lookout cried. "Where?" Akenu demanded, his head snapping around. "It's flying through the air right towards us," the lookout cried, earning looks of shock or disbelief from the other Marines as the Sunny sailed proud and true over the tops of the other ships and landed in the bay with a large splash that drenched quite a few Marines. "Hi guys," Luffy cried, sitting up and grinning at his crew brightly. "Are you here for my execution?" Luffy shouted with a wide happy grin as if he didn't understand what exactly was about to happen. Does he not know the situation he's in? One of the Whitebeard Alliance captains asked in disbelief. "We're only giving you Marines one chance," Zoro spoke up as he stood in front of the rest of the main crew on the Sunny, his sword still sheathed for the moment, while Amand already had hers out prepared for a slaughter. Her hat was inside the cabin waiting for her to come back, and for once she didn't have a cigarette in her mouth. "Give back Luffy and that lady before we start cutting you up," Zoro said, his eye glowing green dangerously. "Come and get them if you dare." Akenu sneered back like some cliché villain. "We warned you," Zoro said with a dangerous savage smirk on his face as he unsheathed his blade. "Ship, ship." The sing-song tone caused everyone to pause, and those that knew that kind of singing to either pale horrified or look devastatingly vicious. "Here's Mama," Ammon said, her eyes alight with glee and eagerness as her mother dropped from the sky where she had been riding on Zeus and landed on the island with enough force to shake it and throw the Marines to the ground. Everyone heard Akenu's disbelief and shock in his yelled question. "What the hell are Big Mom pirates doing here?" "Hi Mama." Those two words, those two innocent and cheerfully said words, those two words coming from the execution stand, those two words coming from the boy on the execution stand, those two simple words coming from the boy about to be executed, those two words coming from the boy with the bright grin and the sea stone shackles on his hands and feet, those two words had most of the Marines standing in between the feared Yonko and the execution stand, looking horrified and pale and causing Luffy to nearly laugh at their reactions. Those two words had almost all of his allies staring at him in shock and disbelief, and in a few cases awe. "You allied with Big Mom? I thought the king of pirates couldn't have a captain?" Akenu asked, sneering down at Luffy, who looked at him confused. "She's not my captain. She's my mom," Luffy said, as if that was all there was to it, and he and his siblings knew it was true. The rest of the world only knew that those that called Big Mom Mama were part of her crew. "Are you all right there, Luffy?" Big Mom asked, looking at Luffy, who nodded his head. "Yep, I'm fine, except for the bruise I got from one Marine who tried touching Whitey. I kicked his ass, but he got no lucky hit," Luffy said cheerfully, and earning a small growl from his mother while Whitey winced a bit, recalling the nasty bruise on his back from that. "Just hang on tight, son. Mama and your siblings will have you free in just a little while," Big Mom said, smiling gently at her son, who just grinned and flopped back down to rest with his head in Whitey's lap. "Luffy," Whitey said, embarrassed and surprised at his actions, causing him to grin up at her. "What? You're comfy. It's okay, isn't it?" Luffy asked with a grin, making his crew raise their eyebrows. Since when did he care if something was okay with someone else? It's fine." Whitey looked away with a small blush on her face, causing Big Mom to narrow her eyes a bit before grinning wider. "Looks like she should start planning a wedding after she saved her son." "Wait, you mean that she's actually your mother?" Kizaru asked, looking at Luffy even as he pointed lazily at Big Mom. "Yep," Luffy agreed with a nod. How did no one ever know about this? Akenu wondered aloud as he stared in disbelief, and if Luffy wasn't mistaken, he was scared too. "I don't know. I didn't know she was my mom either until they found me and told me after we beat up the flamingo guy," Luffy said with a shrug and an uncaring grin. He was actually enjoying seeing how much people were scared of his mom. It meant his mom was really cool and really strong. "We don't have to wait for a war to break out. You two, execute them now." Akenu ordered the executioners immediately, causing Luffy to sit up and move as if to push Whitey back away from them. He was stopped when Whitey grabbed his hand as the executioners raised their blades. Looking over at her, he saw her smile softly at him as they awkwardly held hands thanks to the cuffs. Looking down at his hand where his fingers interlocked with hers so perfectly, Luffy looked back up at her and grinned widely. "Sorry everyone, Luffy called as the blades began to fall towards he and Whitey both, while the pirates assembled cried out in horror and shock at sudden dropping of the blades towards the two's unprotected head. Luffy glanced over and grinned widely at everyone without a trace of fear or regret on his face or in his smile before he looked back at Whitey. He said one thing that had those that were there for Logtown gaping or crying out in horror, before everyone yelled out in shock and disbelief as Whitey lunged forward and claimed his lips with her own. They could hear Hancock letting out a roar of fury from her ship as the blades fell on the two captains kissing, Luffy's words ringing in the air. But I'm dead. No less than 6 things happened all at the same time. Go anchor, Shanks cried from his ship as several wolf whistles rang out. Love rival must die. Hancock screamed furiously. Get away from my baby brother. No less than 5 Charlottes yelled, Smoothie most prominently. The handcuffs fell off of the 2 of them as bony fingers yanked Whitey away from Luffy. One of the executioners nearly cut off Akanu's arm but only managed to take off his hand, and Sanji collapsed to the ground crying and saying that it wasn't fair, which made Zoro laugh at him. See, that was fun, Luffy said with a grin as he looked at Whitey, who was blushing a bit but seemed more satisfied than anything. I don't know what that was about, but your lips taste nice, Luffy said, making Whitey blush a bit harder, but looked pleased even though the executioner that had dragged her away from Luffy looked less than pleased. What is the meaning of this? Akainu demanded as he reformed his cut-off fist using magma, much to the other's disappointment. You really think we'd let you kill ... our little brother? The executioner that had cut off his hand asked with a smirk as he took off the metal cap, showing a head of blonde hair and a scarred face as flames licked at his body. Sabo Niai, Luffy said, grinning widely at the sight of the blonde man who held up 2 fingers in a salute. Why you? Akainu snarled as he moved to pelt the small group with magma. The other executioner raised their hands in front of the others protectively as Sabo ducked back to Luffy, who was standing up and helping Whitey up. A large mirror formed that took the magma at point-blank range, and with a grunt of effort and some armament hacky ... the mirror held. How foolish, Bruy said with a cruel grin as her face reverted back to normal from behind the mirror. Reflection. More than a few of the Marines that followed the creed of absolute justice cried out in horror and shock as magma came out of the mirror and slammed into the unprepared Akainu. Twigny, I knew that was you, Luffy said with a laugh. My name is Bruy Brat. Come on, Lou, let's get you and Ms. Bay out of here, Sabo said with a laugh at his brother pissing off someone at a time like this. Same old Luffy. It didn't look like Bruy minded the nickname though, more like her reaction was automatic. Let's go, baby bro. We're going to slaughter the Marines for thinking they could take you from us, Bruy said, grabbing her brother and pushing him off of the platform. Sabo and Bruy jumped down as well, and Whitey wasn't far behind them. Would you like to use the sword? Sabo offered the sword to Whitey as the 4 of them landed in the cluster of Marines at the bottom of the platform. I'm good, Whitey said, running her hand over the bottom of her shoes quickly and forming a pair of icy blades on the bottom of them before the Marines had a chance to start attacking. I might not have eaten the ice loja, but I have quite a few tricks up my sleeves that these guys don't know about, Whitey said as she closed her eyes for a second, and when she opened them, her eyes were glowing blue with a slit pupil as her hands turned into icy claws. Pretty, Luffy voiced as he noticed the icy blue scales beginning to cover the parts of her skin that he could see, while her teeth became much sharper. Clouds began to brew overhead out of nowhere, dark and heavy, and already letting snow fall from their depths down onto the island and sea near it. Really pretty, Luffy corrected as he knocked out those that were trying to attack his sister or the other female pirate near him. A spiky ice tail appeared on Whitey's backside, and a powerful swing of it had knocked the Marines closest to her back none too gently. Snow dragon hybrid form, Whitey said, nearly purring her words and earning blushes from most of the men around her aside from Luffy, who just continued to grin as he knocked out these that went near his sister. Time to have a party, Whitey nearly sang as she began to skate around, slashing at the Marines with her claws or bashing them with her tail, leaving an icy ground wherever her feet touched and snow falling in droves wherever she went. I like her, Luffy said, grinning widely at his sister, who snorted slightly as they fought their way towards the oncoming pirates who were decimating the shocked, horrified, or frozen Marines. Of course you would chose now of all times to discover your hormones, Bruy said dryly, and making Luffy tilt his head slightly even as he bounced back several bullets. What are hormones? Can I eat them? Luffy asked, earning another snort from the tall mirror user who decked one fool who tried attacking her with his bare hands. Are you both okay? Prospero asked, quickly going over most of the Marines' heads with a candy wave that he then used to either turn the Marines into candy corpses or just squish them with the candy. We're fine, but little brother is starting to notice girls now, Bruy said with a smirk as her nails ripped through one Marine's jugular when he made the mistake of getting close. So I saw, Prospero said dryly as he knocked away 6 or 7 Marines with a twirl of his large candy cane. Mama seems to be having fun taking their lifespans, Bruy said, glancing over to where her mother was stealing the lifespans of dozens of Marines with one hand while squishing dozens more under her feet. She's turning their own weapons into homies to use against them. Prospero said, amused as he saw more than one gun and sword turn on the person wielding it. Raise the wall, kill the son of dragon and all those in our way. Akenu roared out orders to his troops who were being swat down like flies. The wall started to rise up and cut off the small fighting group from the much larger force. One of Big Mom's fists slamming into it knocked a third of the wall down back onto the Marines in thousands of pieces. No one was sure what Dragon did, but his section of the wall just about blew up. Slow waltz. The low tone signaled the clean sword swipe that bisected the wall and more than 24 Marines behind it. Man, is Amani furious. I don't remember her being covered in so much blood since she went through that decapitation phase. Bruy let out a low whistle at how her older sister looked as she calmly walked through the battlefield, cutting down anyone and anything in her way. It was true. The eldest snake-necked Charlotte was covered in blood, with the only thing not bloody being her sword. Her face was dark, cold, and furious as one swing of her sword cut down no less than 10 Marines. Her eyes Haven turned blood red with a reptilian slit to them. Hi Amani. Luffy rocketed himself straight towards his sister, slamming into her and being caught with one arm. Luffy, I'm sorry. I failed to keep you safe like a big sister should. Ammon said, her face softening greatly as she looked at her brother who was hugging her tightly, even as she cut down another batch of Marines. It's okay, Amani. I'm strong. Besides, I got to meet Whitey and she's gonna join my crew. Luffy said with a grin as he pointed towards where there were more than 50 Marines frozen in various parts of their bodies, each one lethal or incapacitating. His 2 older siblings had gotten to their sides quickly as the two had a semi-moment, and right now all 3 had paused for a moment as Bruy pulled her scythe out of the mirror world. He was a Charlotte and a pirate captain. She was an unmarried female captain. He asked her to join his crew and she had accepted. When an unmarried captain was asked to join a Charlotte's crew, it was the Charlotte's way of asking for that captain to marry them. Luffy had asked her to marry him in the way a Charlotte always did, and she had agreed. I need to talk with her later, Ammon muttered as her reptilian slit pupils glanced and narrowed at the Ice Witch. Looking over, Luffy's eyes found his newest crew member just in time for him to spot a bullet hitting her in the back and knocking her forward towards the ground. Luffy didn't even realize he was moving before he was already there. With a roar of anger, Luffy's haki swallowed the Marines and knocked most of them, even the Vice Admirals, out cold in an instant. He had appeared by Whitey's side and caught her gently before she could hit the ground, and the Marine that had shot her suddenly found a giant flaming foot squishing him like a bug. Luffy's snarled out words were only accompanied by the sound of Chopper and several other doctors rushing forward to check on Whitey, who was the only wounded pirate at the moment. Luffy probably didn't even know what he was saying before it was out of his mouth. Don't touch her. She's my pirate queen. Mine. You can't hurt her. Ma. Looks like my son has already picked out quite the interesting bride. Big Mom laughed a bit, although her eyes were still cold, as she grabbed Kizaru, who had gotten too close, and then punched him down into the water. Of course, she hadn't walked to the edge of the island and plunged him in. No, she had grabbed him and slammed him through the structure of the floating island till she reached the water below and left him there. One of the most dangerous men in the world vanished without much of a trace other than the large hole in the island that marked where he had been shoved through by one angry mom. My brother has an interesting choice in women, it seems, Sabo said with a grin as he appeared by Big Mom's foot, braining one Marine with his pipe. Where he had gotten that from without anyone seeing, no one knew. He also seems to react like I do when those I care for are hurt, Big Mom noted almost idly as she destroyed several more Marines that were foolish enough to charge towards her. Honestly, only the believers of absolute justice and the idiots remained fighting now. The smarter ones like Kobe and Smoker and even Isho had made themselves scarce the moment the swords started falling. It was true though. Luffy had become terror incarnate, it seemed, since the Marines closest to him that weren't outright smashed by his haki or killed, incapacitated by his furious, relentless attacks. They weren't running towards him to attack him. They were running away from him. Honestly, I've never seen him so furious before, Sanji said, looking a bit scared himself at the nearly blood-red eyes of his captain, who was smashing skulls and rib cages with just his feet since he was cradling Whitey close with his arms. The woman didn't look to be in too bad of a shape for someone who was just shot. The only sign of her even having been injured was the slight trail of blood leaking from the corner of her two pale lips and the scales having receded from her body. With a nearly unheard groan, Whitey's blue eyes opened and caught sight of the raging man who was holding her close. Blinking as she recalled what had happened, Whitey smiled slightly and moved in Luffy's arms to get down and reassure him that she was fine. At the first movement, his eyes snapped to her, and she wasn't even bothered by the near-feral look on his face or in his eyes as she wiped the trail of blood from her face with the back of one still-clawed hand. Luffy, I'm fine. Captain, I'm fine. See, Whitey had piped up now, causing a few to look surprised that she was even conscious. It missed all of my vitals and went straight through. Whitey moved the vest that she was still wearing aside a bit to show the bullet hole in her abdomen just under her ribs. My abilities are already healing it. See, feel, it's healing now. I promise I'm okay, Whitey said, taking one of his blood-covered hands and placing it on the wound, which was quickly sealing as snow and ice clotted it up and then formed into perfectly healthy, if pale, skin right where the bullet had gone through. There wasn't even a scar left. Only a small bit of blood that had frozen from her body temperature, which was much lower than that of any normal human. I'm an ice witch. Turns out that's an actual thing. A simple bullet like that. The only thing it did was shock me and hurt for a moment. That's why I passed out. The shock of it. I promise I'm okay, Whitey reassured the rubber boy, who stared at her for a moment before the red faded from his eyes as he grinned, setting her down on her feet gently but keeping one arm wrapped around her without really thinking about it. Just see she. That's awesome. Luffy seemed to revert back to his normal self with a grin and a laugh now that he was sure that Whitey wasn't dead or dying. It's certainly useful, Whitey agreed with a small smile before a marine tried to cut them with a sea stone sword from behind. Too bad that not only were Luffy's family around nearby, but both of them were good with observation haki, although Whitey's was more developed at the moment. How? My sea stone should be able to cut through your devil fruit scales, the marine asked, looking shocked when Whitey spun around and held up one scaled over arm, causing the blade to snap in half upon impact. Whitey's scales were unscathed by the sword swing. Oh, when did I ever say my powers were because of a devil fruit? Whitey asked tauntingly just before Luffy's fist slammed into the marine's jaw and probably snapped his neck from the force of the blow. Don't interrupt a moment, jerk. Luffy scowled after the marine, who had been sent flying away like a skipping stone. What are you waiting for? Don't just run at them like idiots. Fire the cannons and use your brains for justice's sake. Akainu was yelling at the other marines, causing a cannon to go off and the ball to fly at Luffy and Whitey. Geez, at least try something new. Since when does this work on me? Luffy complained as he caught the cannonball without much effort, earning a loud, proud laugh from his grandfather as he threw the cannonball back at the ones who had fired it. You know, it almost feels like we're bullying them, huh, little brother? Smoothie asked, having stepped over and picked up a cannon to juice it, dropping the wrung-out mess on top of several conveniently placed marines trying to attack her little brother and his apparent fiancé from behind. Smoothie, nay. Luffy grinned widely up at his sister, hugging her leg as he did so and making her laugh as she gently picked him up. With a slight glare, she picked up Whitey as well and ducked back towards her siblings and Mama, who were advancing towards where the apparent couple were. There was a roar of anger from Akainu and then screaming from some of the marines and the pirates that Luffy didn't know. Turning his head, he saw why. Akainu had joined the fray and was releasing magma, not caring who he hit. Today is the day where absolute justice will finally prevail over spawn of evil such as you pirates. Akainu snarled, making the whole battlefield pause for a second as Big Mom's eyebrow twitched and her powers began to surround her in a miasma of rage. Did he just call my most innocent child evil just because he was born? Big Mom asked, making a few pirates and marines snort. Luffy, innocent? Since when? No one insults my baby brother. Sabo was covered in flames now as he glared death at the marine that had killed Ace and was now aiming at Luffy, it seems. Poor Akainu had no idea what can of worms he just opened. For all of his experience and bravado, Akainu was barely keeping himself alive at the moment, to say nothing of his marines that hadn't been smart enough to leave as soon as they realized who was being executed and how many enemies that they were up against. While they were elite marines one and all, and Akainu was probably the strongest marine in the world at the moment, they were up against an army of pirates. Most of them were New World veterans. And there were not one but two Yonkos and their crews, and Straw Hat Luffy, the newest Yonko, and his crew. Why did Straw Hat have to be made a Yonko just a week before his execution? And why did he have to have so many strong friends that would come for him? Even the weakest group, the Alabasta army, was taking out marines that came near them in the ships since they were supposed to guard all of the ships. Of course, Vivi wasn't happy with that and instead had her peacock slashers out, her old Baroque Works uniform on, and was hypnotizing and slashing any marine that dared come near her. Monty Dore had been left back by the ships on his mother's orders to coordinate the attacks of the pirates, and more than one of his nearby siblings noticed how completely smitten he was with the blue-haired princess. Akainu was trying to fight off Big Mom, Sabo, and even a few others who braved getting close enough to take a swing at him. Garp was taking down his former comrades with an angry snarl on his face, but he seemed a bit sad as he showed them the might of the fist. He was also showing just where his grandson got the habit of catching cannonballs from as he caught any near him and flung them at clusters of marines or the other cannons. Red Hair Shanks and his crew had noticed the arrival of Blackbeard and was taking out his entire crew with the occasional help of the Minks and Straw Hat Grand Fleet members nearby. Hancock and her sisters were weaving a path of destruction and mayhem among the Pacificitas since Hancock was programmed as an ally and her crew were deemed such in their programming by default. They were showing the world just why it was a bad idea to anger Amazons, especially Amazons with large connections to snakes, as Marigold set herself on fire without damage and began using her size to squeeze and burn the pacifista to death. Heroes Nai. Colette cried out in horror, causing Luffy's head to whip around at near neck-breaking speeds. Colette had tried to bind Akainu, but he had broken through and tried to grab her. It looked like Prospero had gotten in the way and had part of his arm melted off. The Candyman grit his teeth to keep from screaming in pain before he looked for his swordswoman sister. Amand, the magma is still moving up my arm. I need you to cut it off, Prospero said, and you could hear the pain in his voice. Amand looked stricken but nodded her head slowly as she approached her brother reluctantly. I'll be quick and clean about it, Amand promised as she noted the large group of Marines trying to attack her brother from behind while he was down. Colette fighting off those that were trying to attack from the left. White flash, Amand intoned solemnly. Her sword swung faster than it had in a very long time. Her sword moved so fast no one had seen it, but they all saw the effects as the flash of the sword momentarily blinded everyone. As soon as they could see again, every Marine within 20 feet of Amand was dead with a strange fish-shaped mark on their heads or hands. Sister Amand, Colette asked, shocked and surprised by her opponent suddenly being dead on the ground, or falling to the ground dead. The flash should have cauterized the wound so that you didn't bleed out. Colette, get Pierrot's Nyai back to the ships and our medics now, Amand ordered her sister, who swallowed thickly and nodded before moving towards her brother. Now that the magma's gone, I'm fine, Prospero said, wincing as he made some candy in the form of an arm over his stump. Amand didn't say anything as the arm formed, just stared at her older brother, who forced himself to his feet and tried to wave off Colette. Amand, Colette was shocked when her sister smacked their eldest brother upside the head with the hilt of her sword, appearing behind her brother silently to do so. Fighting in his condition is stupid. Get him back to the ship before he hurts himself worse, Amand ordered Colette as she easily caught her older brother's limp body, handing him off to her little sister, who was quickly helped by Bruy while Oven and Deifuku covered their escape. Smoothie Nay, go help the others. He's mine, Luffy said, his tone dark and serious as he glared darkly at Akainu. Luffy, Smoothie asked even as she kicked away any Marine near her. We're doing this together, Whitey said immediately without him having to say a word as her ice and snow formed into a pair of wings for a moment. Let's do this, Luffy said as he took off towards Akainu with Whitey flying overhead. Luffy, Smoothie said, alarmed and moving as if to grab her brother, but was stopped by a marine giant that tried to attack her. What's the plan, Captain? Whitey asked without looking at the rubber boy as she flew down close to him for a moment. You go high, I go low. We kick his ass and keep him from hurting any more of our friends and Nakama. Luffy growled out as he saw Akainu lunge at Amand, who batted him away with the flat of her blade, which seemed to hurt him a lot. Aye, Whitey agreed before she flapped her icy wings and went higher in the sky, avoiding the occasional cannonball and pot shot from a pistol. Let's put this rabid dog down, Amand said when her brother coated his foot in haki and kicked Akainu in the head when he was busy trying to melt Amand's sword, or Amand herself. Strangely, it seemed that the magma didn't have any effect on the white blade. Luffy's answering grin was cold and cruel in a way that no one had ever seen before as his eyes locked onto Akainu, who stood back up with a furious snarl. His words were almost casual in deliverance, but the tone was colder than any ice. You read my mind, Amani. Akainu was trying to get in a shot on one of the ones attacking him. He really was, but they seemed to be in perfect sync whenever he went after Demon Lady, who seemed to be aiming at his arms with that blade of hers. Straw Hat was there, knocking him away with his armament haki coating his hands and feet. When he went after Straw Hat, the ice witch dropped from the freaking sky to claw at him or kick him and leave parts of his magma body frozen, if even only a small part, for a little while. Then when he goes after Ice Witch, she would fly out of range and the Demon Lady would strike at him with her sword again. The rest of the pirates tried to get close and help them, but it was too dangerous to get near with the ice and the magma, not to mention the sword and the flailing limbs. Shanks and his crew was busy mutilating, if not outright killing, Blackbeard and his bunch of roaches. Dragon seemed to have vanished into the base itself with most of his forces, but Sabo and Ivankov were still taking out the Marines, and the rest of the crews were falling back towards the ships since they had what they came for. Big Mom was showing Katakuri and Smoothie the proper way to throw giants around like bags of yesterday's garbage, and the rest of Big Mom's children were trying to either get to Amand and Luffy to help them or get back to their boats to check on Prospero and any other wounded siblings. No wonder he was an admiral and then made into the fleet admiral. He's managing to at least keep up with the three of us, Whitey said, wincing at how much maintaining the wings was draining her. I can't keep my wings up for much longer, 5 minutes at the most. I'm more used to ice skates, Whitey said, glancing at Luffy while Amand tried to cleave off Akainu's arm or head, or his leg. She wasn't picky. She just wanted blood, lots of blood. Then use them, Luffy said before he launched forward and slammed an elephant gun into Akainu, knocking him several feet away from Amand. I had it under control, Ammon said as Luffy darted past her to slam a red hawk into Akanu's face. Now the witch will be coming at me from above, Akanu said as Luffy leapt back, throwing a magma fist into the air where he expected Whitey to be. What? Akanu was shocked when she wasn't there, and instead he felt a blade slice through his back, cutting deeply and freezing where it cut. You don't get to be a New World veteran by being a one-trick pony. Whitey laughed as she seemed to dance out of reach, a pair of icy blades on the bottom of her feet freezing the ground where she touched, and a sword that she had stolen from a downed marine covered in ice in her hand. Fuck, Akanu snarled when his magma seemed unable to melt the ice on his back, which distracted him from what Luffy and Ammon were doing. My blade is made of sea stone. Can you throw me like back at Wano? Ammon asked as Whitey danced around Akanu, using her small stature and superior speed to her advantage to keep his attention on her and his magma away. Ready when you are, Luffy said, stretching his arm to make a slingshot. Do it, Ammon said, landing gently on her brother's arm and then holding her sword at the ready as she balanced on his arm for a moment. Gum slingshot, Luffy said, launching his sister at the Fleet Admiral. Flying fish, Ammon intoned as he swung her sword as Whitey danced out of reach. In a flash of blue and green and white, Akanu let out a howl when his left arm was cut off. Ammon quickly stabbed her sword into the ground just a bit past Akanu and swung around with her leg turning black with haki. Slamming her feet into Akanu's back, she hit right on top of the icy patch, which earned a loud shout from the Fleet Admiral as he was launched forward into Luffy's oncoming fists of flaming fury. The Fleet Admiral was then knocked right into Whitey, who danced around him and slashed Akanu several times with the frozen sword. It's not as good as my sword, but make do with what you have to, yes, Whitey asked, smirking as she nimbly danced around his enraged attempts at pain-fueled retaliation. Watch the birdie, Whitey trilled playfully as she dodged around his large right fist, which was separated from his body by another expertly timed swing of Ammon's Mato. You killed someone my baby brother considered a brother. You tried to kill my baby brother, and you maimed my big brother. Ammon's voice was as cold as Whitey's ice as she stepped closer to Akanu. I can still take you down, what? Akanu was startled when an armament-covered Luffy wrapped around him several times to keep him in place. Take him out, Amani. I'll hold him in place, Luffy said with a grin, and earning an answering grin from his sister. What? You'll be killed too, you little brat, Akanu snarled despite the black spots dotting his vision from blood loss and pain. Will you forget something back, Akanu? Luffy said with a grin on his face as he tightened his grip while his sister approached and Whitey kept any other marine trying to stop them off of the other two. My Amani is like Zoro. She's a true swordswoman, Luffy said smugly as Ammon smirked and got into her stance. And a true swordsman can control what he or she cuts, Ammon said with a smirk as she swung her sword. Everything stopped and every eye turned towards the fight as Ammon's voice and the accompanying flash caught their attention. White flash. Everyone stopped and stared as Akanu's body and Luffy both dropped to the floor and more than one person held their breath. For one horrible moment everyone thought that Ammon had messed up, that they would see her fall to her knees in horror when she realized that she had killed her younger brother as well. You okay, baby bro? Ammon asked as more and more marines around them fell, each one having parts of their body cut off. Most of them were decapitations and others were straight up cut clean in half as they fell to the floor like flies with the strange fish mark on them somewhere. Everyone sucked in a sharp breath of air. Had she screwed up? Was Luffy badly injured or even dead and she couldn't tell because of Akanu's body being in the way? I'm fine, but he's heavy. Luffy whined slightly as he untangled his arms and rolled Akanu's headless body off of him. Everyone let out a breath of relief at that. He was truly okay. She hadn't killed him even though he was at ground zero of the attack and literally right behind the man who she had decapitated with a sword that was more than long enough to have hit him as well. What the hell kind of move is that? You just killed at least 20 marines in one move that no one can even see, Whitey asked, surprised and impressed as she moved away from a few of the dead marines around her. There was a bit of blood coating her body and outfit now as she moved closer to Ammon and Luffy, but none of it was hers. Nope, it was all from the marines that had suddenly been sliced apart while she had been in close proximity. And their disgusting blood had sprayed her. You'd be surprised what one could do with a Mato they've been learning how to wield since they were 5, Ammon said with a smirk as she stepped next to her brother and checked him over for any dangerous wounds with her eyes. Thankfully, he only seemed to have some scrapes and a few bruises. He was bleeding a bit from a sword swipe from one of the now dead marines that had grazed him when he and Whitey had landed in the plaza, but it didn't look like it was dangerous. Merely a small graze on his upper torso. Ammon let out an unnoticeable breath of relief. She hadn't showed it, but she had been scared that she had lost control for a moment and had injured her baby brother. 5. You've been able to swing that thing around since you were 5, Whitey asked in disbelief as she stared at the woman who snorted as she was pulled away from her thoughts. No, it was a birthday present from Mama when I was 5, so I learned how to fight with a sword until I was strong enough to pick it up. I didn't start using Shuro until I was 8, Ammon said, earning a nod from Luffy, who thought that it was perfectly understandable while Whitey's sweat dropped. That wasn't much better. What kind of monsters did Big Mom produce? Let's get out of here. I want to check on Piero's knee. Ammon said after making sure her baby brother was okay as her mother finished playing with the giants, and she literally meant playing with them. Wow, she sent that one really far. Luffy said wide-eyed and following the giant's progress with his eyes as his mother punted the giant off into the distance. It's good, Vivi called from the ships, raising her arms as if in a football game, and earning more than a few laughs from the others. Big Mom's laugh was the loudest, however, and she grinned slightly. What an interesting princess. She might have to have her join the family. Badass, knows sports, and beautiful. I think I'm in love, Monty Dor said, causing Galette and Opera both to stare at him before they began cracking up. Oh, he was never going to live this down. That was a dirty trick, Amand. Prospero was conscious again and waiting for them when they had finally made it to the ships, the pirates easily knocking out or cutting down any marine in their path that tried to stop them. Pirate, Amand said without hesitation as she looked at her oldest brother, who did not look amused as he crossed his arms in front of his chest, his candy arm being green and standing out greatly against his blood-stained and slightly ragged yellow coat dress. That is not an answer for everything, Prospero said, looking annoyed, while Luffy's crew immediately rushed over to check on their captain, who smiled and laughed as he reassured himself that they were all fine and reassured them that he was all right, while also introducing Whitey as a new crew member. Luffy, Ammon called, making her rubbery brother's head pop up to look over at her with a half-chirp sound that she learnt meant he was acknowledging her. Her brother had a lot of weird quirks, and she had only learned a few of them since sailing with them, but she was getting better at deciphering what each of his chirps and hums meant. What do pirates do? Ammon asked, making Luffy tilt his head. Whatever the hell we want. Luffy didn't hesitate in answering, despite how curious he was as to why his sister asked a question she knew the answer to. See, Ammon asked Prospero as she motioned with one hand towards Luffy, whose crew was snickering and laughing, and so were more than a few others who had been nearby enough to hear that. Love rival. Hancock had appeared out of nowhere, however, and was glaring darkly at Whitey with a miasma of rage surrounding her. Hey, Whitey asked, blinking before quickly ducking when Hancock tried to kick her. How dare you kiss my beloved Luffy? Hancock began screeching at Whitey, who was dodging her attacks, looking completely confused, while those nearby jaw-dropped as they stared at the cat fight that was starting to happen. Hey, Hancock, why are you attacking Whitey? Luffy asked, confused as he looked at the Snake Empress, who immediately turned towards him with a blush on her face and was positively gushing. She took what was mine, Luffy. Only I get to kiss my beloved husband-to-be, Hancock said, making everyone stare wide-eyed and in disbelief at what they just heard as everyone looked between Luffy and Hancock. Oh, you wanted a kiss too? Okay. Luffy grinned brightly as he grabbed onto Hancock and leaned up. She was positively atomic red at the moment as everyone gaped and Whitey frowned. That snake hussy was going to be flash frozen in a minute. Shoo, the small sound effect did not ruin the overall effect. Luffy's innocent kiss on the cheek had. Hancock's face flared even brighter and she mumbled something about marriage before she outright fainted in happiness, making Luffy look confused and alarmed. Did I do something wrong? Luffy asked, blinking at everyone confused at Hancock's reaction, while Chopper sighed and moved over to check to make sure she was truly okay. You shitty rubber captain. Sanji was torn between a miasma of death and rage, and sinking to the ground in sorrow and despair. What, aren't I only supposed to kiss people on the cheek? Luffy asked, confused and making Ammon smirk slightly as she patted his head. Why do you say that? Galette asked, torn between disbelief and amusement. She wasn't sure if what she just saw was real or some sort of strange post-war hallucination, but damn was it funny to see the looks on the others' faces. Cause don't girls get pregnant when you kiss their lips? Luffy asked, tilting his head and then seeming to remember something as he looked at Whitey. Wait, why'd you kiss me on the lips then? We didn't know how we'd be saved, and you would have had a baby in you when you died of Sabo Nai, and Twigny didn't save us. Wait, that means you're going to have a baby now? Luffy began panicking at that as everyone stared, his crew losing the fight with their laughter. Who taught you that? Oven asked his baby brother, who merely pointed at Ammon. Amani. Ammon shrugged at the looks on their faces as they stared at her, while Luffy kept panicking over Whitey. What? I wasn't going to tell him how babies were actually made, Ammon said, making quite a few people twitch or gape at her. Most of her siblings, and those that knew Luffy, however, looked positively horrified at the mere thought of teaching him about such a thing. Yeah, they couldn't fault her for the blatant lie there. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.